Hello, everybody, and welcome to another PMP end of month review. Well, what is the PMP? Why, that is Painters Motivating Painters, our Google Plus Hangout community focused completely on helping miniature painters and hobbyists take their next step on their own personal journey of miniature painting. So, what we do here is we get together once a month and we review everything that is posted to the community in the end of month review tab, specifically focused on those submissions that the artist is looking for. How do I get to the next level? How do I answer this challenge? I've got a question. I need to understand how to do this technique better. Whatever. People who are asking, looking for targeted, focused feedback to help them take their next step. If you're interested in joining in the PMP, of course, you can look down below. And hey, what's that? Why, it's the link to the PMP. Whether you're a beginner or a master who's been painting for years, we would love to have you along on your personal hobby journey. Anybody of any skill level is welcome, as long as you're wanting to grow. And as I said, take your next step, then this is the place for you. So this month, I'm joined yet again. The boys are back in town. We got the full panel. We're starting out. We've got Eric, Mr. Stone Monk. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I'm feeling good. I've made weight. I'm gonna get in this ring. I'm gonna punch. I'm gonna throw the hook. I'm gonna sweep the leg. And we're gonna get into some business.
No mercy. That's our motto here. Not really. Also joining us is Kieran. What's up, buddy?
Well, we have the leaves have turned up in northern climes of Canada, so we're going to have about our 3 weeks of autumn and then straight into winter now that summer has finished. So that means more time spent inside.
Yeah, sure. This is miniature painting season coming up for you. Yeah, that's for sure.
Load them up. So leading into September here, we're getting a little bit more submissions than the summer months. And we're always happy to see that, because then we get pretty toys to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a marked difference between the end of the summer, when clearly people were out doing outdoor things or not sitting inside under bright lights, painting, and this month, like immediately almost it was like boom, switch flipped. So there you go. Mm-hmm. But as always, this review in the end of month review tab, what we really want to see our artists put in here. There's no hard limit. It's not like anybody can only submit one, but obviously the goal here is to have our artists put in basically, the piece, or maybe the pieces over the month that they have questions on, right? That they want to see, that they feel represents some marked improvement, and they want to ask for feedback on it. I'm really proud of how I did my freehand here. I'd love some feedback, right? How great, perfect. Or I need to know how to do this better. I really had a problem doing texture on this cloak. Can you give me some feedback? Yeah, sure. Like, that's exactly the kind of stuff we want to tackle. Those tricky challenges that hopefully we can help you get over and to get your next step in. So to that end, gentlemen, well, actually, one more thing before we begin. We enjoy doing this review. It's a lot of fun. We do this obviously once a month, but one of the things I do want to say, as I say at the top and bottom of every show, and will continue to do, is although this is a lot of fun, and I hope this is always useful, we are doing the easy part here. The heavy lifting is done by the people who are giving feedback, answering questions, and helping and giving comments and positive critiques every day. So if you're a part of the PMP, or if you join up, participate. If you see somebody ask a question and you've got the answer, answer it. Interact with people. Take a moment out of your day. If you see a fig you really like, or somebody's post you really like, hey, tell them you really like it and tell them why. You can change somebody's day. You can help somebody take their own, next step. You can help somebody grow. And at the same time, you'll do that with yourself, because then when you ask a question later, people are going to be there and ready and willing to return the favor. So
I also want to slip in there and say that your skill level as a painter is not necessarily commensurate with your opinion on things, right?
Yeah.
What I need to say by that is, whether you're an expert level painter or not, you can certainly tell if you like or don't like something, and if something looks right or wrong to you. So please don't be shy about that.
I've actually never painted a model, yet I'm here critiquing yours.
You're such a liar. Don't be a liar like that. You're literally painting a model right now. You just showed us before the thing. You have some wonderful armies. Don't let him undersell you, folks. But yes, I totally agree. As I always say, Tiger Woods' golf coach isn't as good at golf as Tiger Woods, right? Like that's the old story. But you know, the point is he's somebody who's not him and can look at him and say, somebody outside of him who can look and say, oh, you're dropping your shoulder, or, you know, you're bending your elbow at the wrong time or whatever, right? Golf feedback. And so that's the whole point.
But we are not here for golf feedback or anything athletic related.
No, quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah.
So let's.
We will give you advice about what things you can do while you're sitting in your chair.
Yes, that's or standing desk. That's become very popular too. I know there's a lot of artists going to the standing desk. I don't understand it for a moment. I couldn't ever paint like that, but hey, more power to them. All right, so I'm gonna lock on myself. We're gonna screen share it up here, and we're gonna start out. I thought we'd start out with all taking a look at Bleep Bloop, then we'll move on from there. So Bleep Bloop brings us a new submission. Bleep is always, it's always a great month, as I said, when we have a submission from Bleep Bloop. One of the true masters is sort of the non-metallic metal style, always gets into it, always does it. Has a whole, you know, what's it called? I don't know. The one with the Blood Knights. Soul Blight, thank you. That's what it was. Army done up in an NMM style. It looks great. So my only thought on this one I wanted to give back real quick is that, one, I would have liked to see some sharper whites, especially in the darker areas down here, like on the back sides of the lock, to contrast against this. And two, this like really hard white reflection, like I get what you were going for, but it feels too hard almost. Like it needs a little bit of fuzz around it. It's the kind of thing where you look at the reflection and like, if you kind of aren't really looking too carefully, you sell it. But I'm guessing if I was looking at it in real life, I would see basically a thing of white paint. So I think a little bit of fuzz to kind of sell that around the edge would help. And the way you could do that is just like paint on this solid white thing, like bigger, and then glaze your colors back around it, right? You know, pull away from it with a glaze, and that would create your fuzz. So that's my only pushback, or my only, pushback's the wrong word. That's my only thought.
Diffuse it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yes.
That's a professional word.
There you go.
Good. Speaking of which, my only comment, because I love this guy's style and I love what he puts to a miniature and that sort of inner glow that he creates. But my only tip is about photography. I think you need one more lamp here because we're seeing some heavy shadow casting. So my tip is just photography wise, if you can get a third lamp that's coming more from top down to soften that up, I think we'll see sharper images of your models when you take photos of them in the future too.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, you can see we've got two here. Like the third one would kind of hopefully knock those both out, right? Yeah. Yep. Good eye. All right. So next up, we've got a submission from Nico with some of his Nurgle Force. We've got another Ghosty Boy. This one from Alan Thomas, and we've got Fulcrum with Sabine. So I'll take Nico's. If Eric, you would take the Ghosty Boy from Alan Thomas, and Kieran, you would take Sabine. How's that sound?
Yep.
All right. So let's start out with Nico stuff. So this is his budding Nurgle Force. So let's take a look through this. Nico, like myself, is a fan of like super bright colors. And he always does. He likes these like textured bases with the sort of liquid in the middle, this kind of thing. Just kind of looking through here. Obviously, he's got a ton of conversions and stuff like that. That's pretty standard. He loves just basically slamming a lot of different miniatures together. As you can tell, as we have here, the caster from the Glotkin with like part of a Chaos Pony and all sorts of exciting things going on. And back here, we've got, you know, one of our Blight folks, one of the Blight Kings, Blight Peeps. And then here we're using the, the Griffin or whatever. So I think the overall, I'm going to have like a pretty standard piece of feedback for you, Nico, which is I'd like to see some more variants, especially on Nurgle. And I'd like to see, I feel like there's two big challenges here. One, whatever primer you're using is not good because I can see this like chunkiness in the paint. And I'm guessing that's primer. It's when it's this speckled, that's usually primer. So you may want to like look at how little of the fingers are left. Like that's dried paint that's soaked into there. So you may want to like look at less thick primer that's really hitting you hard there. And it might be a question of like maybe dusting it from a greater angle or something like that. The colors on here, I'm not sure you needed the red, to be honest. Like we're basically in this primary color situation. We've got like yellow, red, blue. You can balance that, but like we've got this bright shocker red here, a kind of hidden outer area here, and then a little bit up in the face. But this really kind of stands out as this bright thing. And in general, what I'd like to see is some more controlled application and contrast. So like, for example, with this yellow, it's really thick and there's no variation in the yellow. So like when I look here at the Chaos Knight, between here and here, like I can see a little natural shadow, but that's basically it. So what I'd very much like to see as you continue to build your budding chaos force and ever expand the forces of Nurgle, which of your chaos, which I support, although I wish you wouldn't do Nurgle, but I understand you're trying to do all the chaos gods. So I'll give you a pass since you got a bunch of other good stuff for the other good gods. I'd love to see more variation. I can see it here in the flesh, but then I've got flat blue and flat yellow. I need to see the same stuff you're doing here with the skin here and here. Okay. All right. But cool stuff, man. I'm sure this will be just as big and ridiculous of a force as the rest of your army. Which continues to grow. The man has a chaos force that's like literally Archaon's host. It's ridiculous. All right. So next up, we've got our ghosty boy from Alan Thomas.
Absolutely. Let's see here. So he's getting a lot of feedback on this model about his blending. And if you get in real close, you can see that there's, if you go to the next picture, you'll see more of the cloak, which I think, and you can see the flames up above, where you can see both some chalkiness and or like the white is a little bit more chalky, but then up in the green, it looks like maybe there's some chalkiness there too. From the photo and on the table, like, and looking at this from 3 feet away, and even looking at the thumbnails of this, I really enjoy the color choices you've made and how you've blended them. I think that you are, one aspect of painting, and what I find successful in painting is that when something reads the way you want it to read, and everything here reads the way you want it to read. So I would be very proud of the look and feel of this, and how you've gotten it. Now, there's some really good things here, and I think you mentioned using inks on the armor and that sort of stuff. And that armor on his back looks very aged, looks very kind of modeled and worn down. And same with the mask. I think there's some good things there. So yeah, I think that you've got some good things going on there. You could work on any highlights of those or scratches on those, taking a brighter silver and getting some more scratches and stuff taken care of. This guy, when he's floating around, like, that's the only super solid part of him. So that's going to scratch against things. He's gonna almost forget about it sometimes, right? Oh, I'm just brushing up against this, going through this wall. Oh wait, I forgot to dematerialize my armor. So that sort of thing. But in terms of blending, now, I mean, I can say this every single week with every single question. Vince has some really good videos on blending in many different styles. The one I prefer is called is straight from the pot, one brush, 2 color blending. And what I think is easy to achieve is you get enough paint on there that you can keep it wet. And if you use a flow retardant, or not a flow retardant, or is that it? A flow agent? Anyway,
I think you're searching for flow improver and retardant medium, which work well together, because then it keeps your paint flowing, but also it dries very slowly.
Yep. What I like to do is I'll get my first coat on there really strong, a really solid base coat of, and I'll even block it out. So in the way you've done it, this would be a very great base for going back in, and you take your your dark tone up there, and you take that medium tone of a green, and you get it wet back up on the black area, and then you get most of the paint up on the model, and then with some paint still on there, you dip a little bit into your green, and you work, because the green's the most prominent on the front. You start towards the middle and you work your way back towards the black, and you're going to be using up the green as you work towards the black. And when you get back to the black, it'll be a blend of the two, and as you work further up, it will get up there. And so I tend to work with a lot of very wet paint when I'm blending. That's big surface areas. If I'm doing small detail, if I'm doing that sort of stuff, I'm using more watered down paints and doing many layers. So that's one way to go about it if you want to get your first layer done. Now that you have this, I think your best bet is to work in some glazes. There's a couple. I don't know that I own any of the blues and greens. I own the camo shade, but I don't think that's the right blends. So a blue or a blue-green. I'm looking at a cool gray that Secret Weapon uses that could work. But glazing that, going over it many layers with a glaze, it'll start to blend that together. And you could, you got, Kieran, you look like you might have some suggestions.
I got, this was going to be my suggestion. The Secret Weapon wash called Algae is right in the wheelhouse of that color spectrum that he's working with.
Cool. So if you use a glaze, and you can make some of that. If you took that, let's see, that seafoam green towards the bottom, or something in the middle there, and we're able to add some medium to it and a little bit of water. Let there be more medium than water. You go over that a few times, and you'll see those blends. Those stark contrasts that kind of disappear. And same with the white, that starker transition between the white and the seafoam, that would help with that as well. Don't go for something that's going to be super wet and pool in the recesses. I think that's my least favorite thing about the ethereal stuff is things that pool in the recesses. But I think with some glazes you could smooth that out quite a bit. That's what I got.
Yeah, it looks good.
Right on.
Right on.
I like this guy. He's a cool model. Like, it's just a cool dude. I enjoy this guy.
And you, like I said, he looks great. You've done a great job of finding the right places to put stuff.
So many of these new Nighthaunt guys are just cool, just super cool looking dudes. All right. So next up we got Fulcrum and Sabine Wren.
Yeah. On those Nighthaunt things, what is the reported back average of breaking my model when I take it in and out of a fitter case?
I don't know. Here's what I'll say. There was a lot of Nighthaunt at Nova. A lot of people had a lot of Ghosty Boys. I didn't see any broken models. I mean, they must be, the whole model is so light, right, that even a light connection point will generally hold it. You know what I mean? Because there's not much above, because it's kind of empty and
And when you drop them, they float.
They just, they're like, it's actually like dropping a leaf.
They're real ghosts.
Yeah, it's like the feather at the beginning of Forrest Gump.
Huh.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, anyway, let's give Fulcrum some due attention here on Sabine Wren. So there's a couple of great things about this model that I want to bring into light right away. And that is, we've said so many times that very often painting black and painting white are the hardest things to do because they just always end up looking chalky, or they end up looking, not quite the color that you intended. But I think that he's done a pretty great job of making that transition colors go smooth here. We get the idea that she is, in that black bodysuit. And those couple of spots where he's gone with, inside of thighs and across the back of a much lighter gray kind of sells that a little bit better as well. And then he's also given us the idea that she has black hair, but brought in another color in there to make it a little bit more interesting. So full kudos to managing that. That's my big compliment off the hop. But I do have a couple of things that I think I could offer as a little bit of an extra way to go. And I actually want to look at the hair for a second. So you can see the backhand shot is the best way to look at that. I think to reflect the curvature of the head, because it's hair that's sort of bowling around her, the shape of her skull, and then it tucks back in for a second before, as it drapes down, and it opens up a little bit more as it goes towards the nape of the neck. So along this line, what I'm getting at, Fulcrum, is that you can come in here a little bit darker again as it kind of comes underneath the crown of this, or yeah, crown of the skull. No, it's not the crown of the skull. Where your medulla oblongata goes. That's
the base of the skull.
I'm talking about. Base of the skull, yes. So when it comes underneath the base of the skull, I think we can go a little bit darker in there. The blue should be less vibrant in that little space, and then you can come back out to it like you did as it trails away to the tips of the hair. So that's one thing I think to improve the black there. What else do I want to talk about on here? Oh, yeah, actually one other interesting thing that I found on here is if you can get some tighter shots. I don't know if people can see with the size of this frame, but he's got polka dots on gloves and boots. And I'm going to admit to you guys, I'm not a Star Wars aficionado by a long stretch. So am I misreading that? Is that polka dots, or is that starscape that he's trying to achieve there, do you think? And is there any relation to this character that
I don't know on that. I think it's just literally polka dots. I think he's just going for, she's fun.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it adds a good, fun, extra little bit of flavor, and it's not overbearing. Like you actually have to look close, which is a good thing about a figure. When you have to look at it from 3 feet away and get attracted enough to come in and look closer, it's kind of things like this that add an extra layer of character to it. So for people doing, when they're thinking about composition of models, that's a really important sort of extra level to bring your model to. A lot of people do that with freehand, and he's done that here. He's done a shoulder symbol on that left shoulder that brings you in and make you look a little bit closer. But the polka dot things are a cool add-on that make you come in and discover something else. The one last thing that I thought of here while we were looking at the frontal shot is I thought I'd maybe offer that I think the face could be shaped a little bit better. And this is simply by just going to one more level of highlight on the places where light would catch. It reads to me that you have a bit of a right shoulder light source on this model. So she's got a little bit of hair draping down over her eye on that side where you've gone with the light a little bit heavier. So therefore on that side of her face should be a little bit more light catch on that cheekbone and the inside of the nose. And then of course a little bit of highlight on the opposite side too, but not as strongly necessarily as what you do on the right. And I think that brings the face into a bigger feature as well. Yeah, so there's my couple bits of feedback. If you do want to, and I don't think that those two things that I offered as extras would take you too long to do with your skill level as a painter. So think about that if you want to do a little bit of extra bits. That's what I got about that.
Right on. Okay. So let's see. Next up, we got some fun stuff. We got a big old giant thing from Dylan Carter that I'm pretty excited about. We've got two from Caspian Cleason here. So we can take both of his together. And then we've got a Dwayne Thompson brings us as a first-time poster. Ooh. And he's decided Archeon is the first thing he's going in with.
He's our kind of guy.
Respect.
Set the impressions.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you what. Kieran, I wonder if you wouldn't mind taking the big giant beastie monster here, this thing from Dylan. And then Eric, if you want to tackle Caspians, I would very much love to take Archeon. Is that all right?
Sure. That is fine.
All right. So I'll go ahead and kick us off here with Archeon. We'll go in a little reverse order. So first off, Dane, I might have said Dwayne. I'm sorry, I read a W in there, but I'm bad at names. So welcome to, as a first time poster, now you'll get the fun experience of Vince misreading your name in this video, because that happens all the time. Poor Tebow, who, boy, I've got that guy's name wrong like 800 times. Anyways, he said his previous painting experience was one Sylvaneth army. And he started here with a Zenithal Prime and tried to do glazing on the cloak to make it pop. He used yellow ink to glaze over the Vallejo metal color steel to try to provide the gold, to try something new. Main thing, he thinks he could have done better are the wings. The pre-shading didn't come out as strong as he'd like, and he didn't have the time to wash it down to bring it back up. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, there we go. So, you know, first things first, it's good. Like, it's a good model. The yellow over the steel is an interesting choice to get gold. I mean, it's not weird in any that way, shape, or form that far. I mean, gold's true color is yellow. It's not that strange. The difference is that gold also has brown in it, so you do want to make sure you get some sepia tones in there as well. And that's the first thing I'd say, is a lot of the gold is very yellow, perhaps too yellow. Like here where you've got the yellow in the steel, like a straight steel color, you can see how it comes out very gray and kind of dull, a little too much so. If we had brown warm tones in there, it'd be better. Now we've got some nice push-ups of dark here, so that's good, but we want to go a little farther on that. When it comes to things like the skin of the faces here, let's tackle that stuff. Where we've got these three, you know, sort of the three heads. We want to make sure that, one, if we do a bright color like this, where we've got red or blue or green, we need that to blend into the neck. So you kind of have, with the feathers, maybe you've got more of an excuse to do a hard edge, because it's like, well, they're feathers and this part isn't feathered. So, okay, fine. Although birds still look best when there's some kind of transitional color. With the red here, you can see how we got a little red down onto the skin. And that's kind of it, like very thin. There's also a gap here. You want to make sure you watch out for stuff like that on these kind of big models. And same with the green. So like we want to blend that together so we get like a nice smooth transition in there. Now, as to the wings, you mentioned it. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. So one of the tricks with pre-shading is you can't zenithal and then put gray over top of it. You got to put a color over top of it. Gray isn't a color, right? Gray is half black and half white, neither of which are colors. They are simply expressions of combinations of colors as reflected in light. Okay. So you can't really use them with zenithal. So here, I mean, you already said you knew it. This needs more washes, dry brushes, all that kind of stuff, right? That being said, it's not that they look bad. You did a nice job of cleaning up the lines here. So the black against the fairly stark white, you know, actually looks pretty good. That doesn't bother me at all. So like, you could do some crazy wing transitions. That would be fine. I have no problem with that. But honestly, I don't feel like it's super necessary. I think you could stick with this and that would be okay. The couple other things I want to touch on here. The skin of the monster itself of Dorgar looks good. I like the gray underbelly, the black sort of actual top skin looks nice. Both of them look color appropriate. A little bit of smoothing again in between the two. You could transition this with some Nuln Oil controlled washes, right? Just like pull towards the black and then feather the edge. And that's fine. The hooves look really good. I like your striations. You have a nice transition here. We could go a little brighter on the edges and the very bottoms. Same with the claws, but you're going for that transition. So I don't mind that at all. The big things that jumped out at me as needing some attention are, one, and this is the real big one, is this flame. So it looks like you kind of followed like Duncan's tutorial and you did kind of this fire. The problem here is we don't have a good color balance on what's going on here. Now, but personally, I don't like this like sort of embedded fire. It's kind of a thing that drives me nutso. But you know, if you want to do this, then here's what we need to do. One, this yellow is way too bright and weak. This needs to be like your yellow up here should be like ochre, something like that, like a very warm yellow. Then the vast majority of this should be orange. Flame is orange, the vast majority of it. Like think in simplest terms, if I said to you, picture a campfire in your head, what color is that campfire? It's orange. I don't need to hear your answer. I already know that's what's in your head, because that is the majority color of fire. So you want to make sure that the most of this is orange, and then you get a little red down on this end. So ideally, if the interior is your red, you want to keep a smooth direction to it. Like here on the arm, we've almost got some spottiness where it goes like yellow, red, yellow, red. That starts to look weird. That starts to look strange. We want to show a transition of heat to sell the flame, right? So we want to go from like a slight bit of dark red, not Ferrari red, not candy red. And that's another thing. Your red is a little too red. Like when we put red in a flame, it needs to be a very deep, warm red, like a whole red. And then it should transition from that basically into a broad orange with some warm yellow to tip it off. That will sell the flame effect a lot stronger. Okay. The horns and the cloak look really good. I like the transition here quite a lot. I think the edging looks nice on that. Cloak looks great. Like you had mentioned, the cloak is a standout thing. I think it looks good. Again, you might be able to like put a little more edge down here on the bottom or something, maybe a little more highlights up here on the edges, but that's minimal and could honestly be camera stuff. Red transitions tend to get washed out in the camera, so I'm not going to beat you up for that. I think it looks nice. The other thing that jumped out at me was just the edging on Archaon's armor. You want to make sure when you're doing this kind of edging that we're very sharp, very controlled. Same with the gold that you put onto him. I feel like you painted him sitting on here. If I'm wrong, tell me. But I'm going to guess his shield was attached when you painted, and he was sitting in this seat. And the reason I say that is because I can see the missing kind of gold here. And it looks like your lines kind of got squidgy where you got near other parts and weren't able to really control your brush at the right angle. It's a great argument for sub-assemblies and that kind of thing. All that being said, it looks fine. Like there's nothing bad. You just want to make sure when you're doing it, you want to be razor sharp. And if you get a line that's too fat, that's okay. Just get some of your original base color here and push the color back toward the edge to thin out the line. Just very careful, slow strokes. You push in, and then eventually you'll get the edge of your brush using the flat side of your brush, not the tip, flat side of the brush, and you push up and you just line right down there. So, but there you go. That's Archaon. Very, very, very bold first submission, and I hope you did well with this at your local store's painting comp.
And if anybody else out there wonders if they could do this, just repeat to yourself, yes, Archaon. Oh, wait a minute. That's a different model.
Moving on.
Your puns will get no extra playtime today.
That's all right.
I'm all about it. I love it. I keep it going.
I prefer it when they fall on deaf ears.
Yeah, that's always better. You want a pun. You want to be the only person laughing at your pun. That's how you know you got a good one.
Yeah.
All right.
Go next.
Caspian Cleason. So I've got his purple and green girl up here first.
All right. So using some greens and yellows on this free guild was one of the suggestions that was given to him in complement to the purple, I imagine. Vince, do you remember?
Yeah, so we had talked about, like with the green, he needed to bring in more yellows and kind of push up the effect of the highlights, strike out some more light points, change it around so it's not just completely sort of the horizontal stuff. And I think if you spin around, I mean, my initial supposition is he actually executed on that pretty darn well. Yeah. I think the cloak looks fantastic. Spoiler from my point of view.
No, yeah, that looks fantastic. I'm seeing it. There's a ton of depth and transition. And I mean, especially in that middle there, you're verging in on bleep bloop level of contrast. And that's great. I think being able to let those recesses be dark and not touching them and not putting more paint on them and let them be what they are can be tough. And I think you've probably crossed over a nice chasm in your paint by letting those areas be dark and letting the paint, the lighter paint, rest on the higher stuff. And the blends are good. There's a couple of places where, one that it looks like you're doing some hard edge highlights, and that ridge on kind of right on the middle of the back. I think that seems pretty successful. Again, getting into some of those hard edges, although that can be a little too hard sometimes, and that particularly harsh highlight, we don't see that anywhere else on the cloak. So I think that there's either more room to add some highlights or to tone those down so that they're kind of in line with the brightness elsewhere. But I think especially that lowest part of the cloak, that little triangle of cloth that comes out because he's kicking back. That's probably one of my favorite parts. Those sorts of things. It does look like a couple of places where you're highlighting those edges and your brush is getting away from you a little bit. On the left, that second fold down, it looks like it kind of triangles up away from the that sort of stuff. So a little bit more control. Don't have quite so much paint on the brush. Move your model around so that you get the right. If your point of your brush was pointing up to the top of the model, you're probably in the wrong angle. You probably want to be flipped the other way so you can get that edge just lightly on the tip. But things like that. But otherwise, I think you've executed really well. You've picked a really good green with that and getting those yellows on there to highlight that up. So do you want to look at his other one? Or do you have anything else on this one?
No, I agree. Let's take a look at this. He says he's not happy with them at all. Oh, that's a rough one. At all.
At all. All right. First thing I'm going to tell you is your gold and your brown tones are too close together. If you're working with a chestnut brown, which maybe you're like, hey, that's what color horses are. You can go a couple of different directions. You could go with a darker kind of Mustang color. They tend to be a darker brown. And that's going to let the gold contrast off of that. Or you could go with a lighter, more yellow tone in the fur. Look at fjord horses. Look at I'm trying to think of some of the other. Just go to more of a blonde, and then shade the gold armor down so it's darker. So that's a couple of ways you can go. I think primarily what'll be hard for us to critique in terms of like technique and stuff is because everything is kind of this shade of brown. And this is probably the number one thing in making a model look good is that blocking things and contrast in the right order. If you've got the people who create these models, I think some of them are very, very good at intuiting, like, hey, I'm going to have this type of texture and then this type of texture next to it and then another type of texture next to that. But sometimes they're not thinking about the colors at all when they're sculpting. They're just like, hey, I'm going to put this here and this there and this blah, blah, blah. So learning how to take what they've given you and what spaces to put things on, where to put your color so that they balance out, that sort of thing is I think lesson number one, and sometimes the hardest thing, because there's no technique to that. It's something you just learn. So, well, I guess there is some technique in terms of when we talk about, one of the things we often talk about is balancing colors out. You want 3 points. So for instance, the figure on the left has a purple tabard. You want to find some purple someplace else. And now, while she doesn't have any other robes, perhaps that's what there's some purples in her hair, or maybe you're using some purple shade in the gold armor. So things like that. The green as well. You've got a couple places where you have green, but that's not enough. The green isn't represented enough to balance out, again, some of those browns and golds that you have either. So finding those points of balance, finding those alternating textures and giving them enough contrast When two colors are next to each other, or when you've got two sections next to each other, they contrast enough so that it's easy for the viewer to pick out what part is what. Yeah, and I think that would be where I would go. I wouldn't worry about anything else yet. I would just, can you block it out? Can you find these other pieces that are going to balance out those purples and the greens, and can I contrast the gold with a different color brown?
Great advice. You hit on exactly, like literally exactly what I was going to say. Yep.
It's like we've been doing this a while.
Wow, that's so weird. Yeah.
The other thing that I might add in there as a possibility is you can go to that antiqued gold where you do some washes and tinting with green in the gold. That usually picks up pretty well.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Absolutely. Yeah, it can be another, get those different colors in there. Gold can accept a lot of weird colors and still feel like gold.
Yep.
Right? Like it can have purple tones and green tones and all sorts of stuff like that in it, red tones. All these different colors of the rainbow can end up in gold, and it will still feel like gold.
As much as there is some complaints, I feel like the Stormcast have given us a lot of experimentation in that over the last few years.
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. All right. Next up, Dylan Carter, and he's got the big boy. But is this like the Archangel or something from War Machine? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's what that was called. I've been eyeballing this model for a couple of years myself and trying to justify taking it on, because it really is quite imposing and quite stunning. I think from tip to tail, it might be outstretching our good pal Archeon that we looked at a few minutes ago. If not, it's very, very close to that. So it's the same stature overall. Now, Dylan's approach and attack on this one really showed off his skills in doing color transition and blending. So the underside of the wings, you can see where he's gone with a very cool blue that moves into purple, and then when he flips it around to the top side of the wings, he's doing a whole color shift and getting into warm oranges up there. This is a real challenge for a painter, and what it reads from a sort of a bigger level of approach is that you're working in temperatures. So cool versus hot is always a challenge of a painter to try to balance that out, or even get them to work together in a model composition. And I don't know if that's exactly what Dylan's motivation for where he went at this was, but certainly that is a worthwhile endeavor for any artistic painter to try to take it on. So when you think of it from a color temperature perspective, let's think about what he's got here. So obviously the blue is the coldest spot, and he matches that with the coldness that's on that beaten iron armor that this guy is wearing. It moves into a little bit of a sort of an aqua green color, but that's just to sort of the age and the patina of the metal. So I think I like that color choice too. And then of course, if you flip us to the next frame, I think is the shot of the back, and you'll see how if you can get us to the back of the wings, you can see how very warm that is from here. But yet when it tucks away and it starts to get in towards the body, it cools down a little bit, and he moves into purple to do that, because that's the sort of part of the transition. But at some points you can see the peaks of the color catch is as bright as yellow in some places there. But the spectrum shift is really pretty smooth throughout the whole thing. So I think he's captured that really well. There still maintains a little bit of warmth in the purple spectrum where he gets to it on there. But if we go back to and examine the skin tone of the dragon itself, you're going to see that there's places where even the purple starts to cool off, right? So if you look at the bridge of his neck, that reads to me as a warm sort of pinkish purple. And then when you're moving down underneath and, under the arms and the musculature, it goes darker and it becomes more of a plum kind of purple. So again, even in that, you can see the color temperature shifting as you go down there. Now, so that's all the lavishing of glory. Now let's talk about a couple of things that I think could help out this composition artistically. If you could span us back out to an overall shot for a second, even that's fine right there. Yeah, or the front on, any of those will do. I think we need, when we think about the composition of this, we have a warm source on the back of the wings. We obviously have a very warm source with the heat coming out of the mouth, but I think we need one more. And that might just be in the environment that he's in. So looking down towards the base and the plinth that he's on, you've gone with sort of a dark bluish, sort of foamy green color down there. And I think that here's an opportunity where you can do a catch of orange light. I know that Dylan, in the past, you have put things in environments where it's like a sort of a rusty Martian sandscape where you've used orange for the soil itself. That might be one way to do this. So that's a possibility. The other thing is that you could try to emulate the same kind of brightness and power of that light source in his mouth, and have some lava pooling down here underneath the rocks. If you do the promontory like you did, though, then you can shield the bottom part of the tail model from getting that color or your light spillover. I know that you're capable of that, so that's possible if you want to do that. Use that as an object light source potential. But if you build that crest of it and you position the lava, it doesn't have to. It can just cast up onto the underside of the rock and be done right there. But I think that it does need one more source of warm touch as a composition. The one other thing that is tricking my eye a little bit once we start to look deeper and deeper into this is the stone, the hedron that he's perched on, has some metallic framing to it as well. And that metallic framing doesn't have the same kind of detail and color contrast as what you developed on the armor. And it's not that it's a bad technique, it's just that there's something that tells me that this is what armor looks like on this model. This is what metal looks like, but yet it doesn't quite look the same, even though it's a different metal on the framing of that rock. So I guess my simple suggestion is that I think we need some more bright touches of light catch, obviously in the appropriate color that you would do for brass instead of like you did with the iron. But of course you can come up with something there and match that technique. So you have some light catches on that metallic that frames a little bit better than it is right now. I also want to add here before I close, talking about Dylan's piece, that I actually saw this elsewhere. He put this into a miniature monthly painting competition.
Yeah.
And I actually don't recall now whether it was in the same state as where he shared it here in the middle of September or in early September, where he shared it here. He asked for some feedback about some of the things, same topics that I just discussed. So I'd have to go look back upon that now and see if he actually did change anything before submission to there. But I did notice that Dylan was the winner of the best privateer press created model in that one. So
I saw that too. Super shout out. That is a big congratulations. That was a tough contest, man. There's a lot of entries in that. So that's a huge win and well earned. Like I really do love this. I think, you know, there's certainly, as I think Kieran went through, all those things are fair, but at the same time, you know, as we've said, this is such a wonderful model and really well executed.
Yeah. And I'd also want to add that selfishly, we as a PMP community, and I don't just mean the three of us, but I mean the whole community, takes credit in all of the wins that our members take elsewhere.
That's right. We all share in the glory. That's the deal. Yep. That's what you sign up
thanks
for.
For that, Dylan. We appreciate it.
Thanks for bringing home the gold for us. We appreciate it. Yeah, I see us as like the home country, right? It's like, you know, if your country wins gold in the Olympics, it's like, you know, oh, you brought home the gold in the 100-meter. Well, that's what this is. You know, a PMP member brought home the gold.
Nice.
All Okay. This is awesome. I love it. All right, let's keep moving. So let's see. We have a little Carnosaur, which I can only think of the Roger Corman movie now, because I watched that recently. From Quentin Alexander. We've got Nick Curtin, who's got something that I'm not going to be reviewing. And then we've got Gabriel R., who's doing a very like black and white exploration. Okay. So I thought with this one, if it's all right with everybody, I will take the Carnosaur. Eric, if you will take the gross, nurgle, disgusting thing. And Kieran, you had a lot of experimentation somewhat recently with like, high contrast black and white stuff. I thought maybe if you might want to take a look at this and maybe share some of your own experiences with working with that kind of a palette.
Oh, sure.
That sort of very highly muted palette. All right. So we start off with Quentin Alexander and the Old Blood on Carnosaur. Says he took second overall in his store's paint competition. Congratulations. Yet again, bringing home the silver for the PMP. No,
Yeah.
So let's take a look at this guy. Okay. He says he feels like it was one of his better models he's done to date. Awesome. Well, then let's talk about where we're at. So overall, it is a very nice model. I certainly understand how you got to where you did there. The elements of it that I like are things like the striping on the skin. It's subtle, but very effective and there. I like the underbelly color being, sort of lighter and that kind of thing. The areas of the model are all nicely picked out. The paint looks very cleanly applied. So I think my main pushback to you here, or my main, item for you to work on, whatever we want to say, because overall he's very nice. Like you've got a great set of base colors here. Your composition is good. You pulled some blues up. You pulled blues down. You pulled some reds up. Well, my main sort of item for you here is tonal variation. Everybody take a drink. The scales are too flat. So for example, like a wash over all these scales with like a super light makeup brush, dry brush to pick out the edges even would make that guy's scales just pop, pop, pop. Okay. Same with Mr. Alpha up top. This bone piece, I mentioned earlier about the contrast in the bone, and we talk about this a lot. I would love to see a transition in this bone on this guy's perch, like have this be very dark here at the mount and then go up to something quite white and light. You can do this with just a series of ever lessening washes, right? You do a sepia over the whole thing, you kind of smooth the edge. You do an agrax, you kind of smooth the edge. You do another agrax, you smooth the edge. And then maybe a tiny bit of like Nuln mixed with agrax down here at the bottom. Something like that's fine. Whatever you want, however you want to go about it. With the gold and the metals, I would encourage you to watch my video about shading true metallic metals, because that's my biggest challenge here. All of this gold is very, very, very flat. It's just flat gold. It's not doing anything. It's not reflecting. It's just flat. I would love to see more tones in here, pushed in, shadows, even if it's just darker colors down these recesses, silver highlights and glints, edging it, all that kind of stuff, because that's what's really letting me down more than anything. The rest of it is that's really, I think, the part where you got your biggest challenge. Go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, I like your tone of it's not bad. I'm just disappointed.
No, that's not what it's not. I hope that's not how it comes across.
Sure you're not a dad?
I'm not angry with you. I'm just disappointed. No, I'm not disappointed in this at all. It's a great model. So the final things I'll say is, again, here in the mouth, since you got a red Carnosaur, you probably want to push your tongue and mouth colors around because it kind of blends in. So you want to like deep purple and stuff like that for here in the gums to really recess them. Maybe even work in a little bit of very light black glazes, stuff like that. Pop the tongue up to like a light purple color or a purple mixed with flesh tone. Animals can have all sorts of color tongues. It's a weird, wild world of tongues in the animal kingdom. Giraffes have weird, creepy black tongues. So any color of tongue is possible. But I think if you push up that tonal contrast across the model, you're going to see this thing really just pop off. Overall, really nice model. Good basing, good jungle scheme. You got like some sticks and puddles and, you know, tufts and stuff down there. I like all that. So, yeah, very cool things. I dig it. Hope to see more.
And
Right.
Quentin for bringing home hardware for the PMP as a group.
Absolutely, yes. Which, as we have previously mentioned, we all share the honor of together. Okay, here we go. A very gross thing from Nick Curtin. Somebody take it away so I can stop looking.
I got this. All right. So this is a great example of what I was talking about, is that idea of contrast, alternating colors, and alternating how, you know, where things group together. So you've got this pink tongue that's working its way all around this model from many different orifices. And, you know, sometimes it's
I really hate everything you just said.
Some of it, sometimes it's next to the dark green, sometimes it's next to the light green, sometimes it's next to the orange, sometimes it's next to the more muted green and flesh tones. And so, you know, just a really good job of finding places for the color to be other places. Now, and again, this is a, you know, primarily a fleshy model. There's no clothing on it. There's no armor on it generally. So, you know, this is a time where even in the skin tone itself, finding opportunities to vary it, to make it lighter green towards the hands and towards the knees, and, you know, when the bone's sticking up, towards the belly, we've got a little bit different, more muted green, or a little bit of pinks in there. And then, you know, you got opportunities for the teeth and the claws and the horns to pop out. So fantastic job giving us these kind of alternating colors, because it just adds visual interest all around the model. In this case, because of the color choices, that pink tongue becomes the focal point that's coming around this, which is probably good because, you know, this is a unique feature of this particular model and how much they're using it compared to other Nurgle themed models. But what I would probably love to see maybe a little bit more, or what I would love to see you do, is take some of those dark greens and towards the shoulders is go dark again, maybe real dark, and kind of like towards, you know, what you have under the armpit. If you can go to a really dark forest green or mossy green around there, it's going to allow the face to pop a little bit more amidst all of this. And it's, if you can get that green up around like those bone spurs that are coming off of his back and around the head, those are going to pop off quite a bit more. So I think you've got a great variation, and because of that, I think you need to get higher contrast. And so getting into those darker greens in some of those recess areas, and the way you do this, like you know how to do this in a way that where you're like, okay, I'm choosing to pick a new area in this so that I can break up the space. This is the same thing. If you go, you know, darker around there, let's advance it. Do we have a back picture?
You want to see if he's got pustules coming out of his bum as well?
We do not. We only have.
I was looking for.
We only have like left and right side basically.
Yeah, I was looking for a butt tongue. You know, just making sure.
Always got to check for that.
So then the other thing I would am looking at is the kind of sword hook thing. I know you're going for kind of a rusted feel to it. However, because you're using kind of like a reddishness in the bone and spurs coming out of his back, it reads a little bit like that, and maybe it should. If that is the case, then going to more of a bone color would be really good for that. As it is metal, and you have the bell hanging off that's more of a brass with a patina, I might encourage you to go that direction with that. It just feels like it's very alone in this model, sharing that particular texture, sharing that particular color scheme, etc. I think it'd be, because the handle has teeth, I think you may want to go more towards the bronze kind of feel to it. And I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else on the model where you can have that bronze to balance it out. But there's not really, you'd have to go pretty artificial, maybe put a piece of metal or something on the base towards the left side underneath his hand so that you could maybe put that the same kind of color, etc. Not a because there's not a lot of art inorganic material. It definitely needs to stand out a little bit more, or not trying to. I think that orange spectrum that it's trying to take up is taking away from the horns and spurs coming out of it. Otherwise, I think this is a great model. I think you've done a great job, making it look cool. I love the bubbles down in the river, etc. I would black base it or black edge the thing, just to let that scene feel like it's framed and continues on forever outside of it. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, much like Henry Ford said, you can have any edge color of a base as long as it's black. All right. So Gabriel R. with, I believe, his first post as well.
Nice.
He's got a couple questions.
Quite an effort, and you're very right. Is that I had some experimenting over those last couple months with some blood reavers and doing myself a very limited palette, and done correctly. I think the end goal is that it can be a very powerful effect, even though you're using, maybe as little as 4 different paint pots across the board here. But certainly it can appear striking. I think the first thing that strikes me when I look at this thing is I recognizing that there's a lot of metal here. There's obviously the shifting of black and white, and then with his secondary color, the thing that really sells that is the idea of having a secondary feature color, and he's chosen to go purple in this case. And it very often is in the management of how much of that sort of feature color that you put into place that really sells the rest of the models. So as you scan through a couple of pictures here, I think the thing that I want to share with you, Gabriel, that I experienced is that when you're staying in this limited color palette, sometimes the challenges are how to make different surfaces and different textures look different enough from one another, even though they may appear to the eye to be the exact same color. So what I mean by that is you certainly do have belts, fabric, metal, and maybe some other hard polycarbonate plastics or whatever they're making their armor out of these things. And so therein lies the challenge. Is how do you make all 4 of those different things look different, but still just use the same colors in each? So I think what I've learned and what I'd offer to you is that the hardest things need the hardest highlights in general, I think is what I've learned. So working our way down, so therefore we have to have the brightest, sharpest contrast in the edgings of metal, and then the polycarbonate, and then the belts, and then the fabric, in that order, right? Now, I could see that by the way that you've laid the groundworks for this, that you do have an airbrush, and that is obviously the way to start. How controlled you can be with that airbrush to get in and do the softer stuff on the fabrics and the softer transitions on there really depends upon the tool that you're working with and how much practice you've had at it. But certainly that is one way that you can do the softer bits on any kind of fabric space. But again, you'd have to be really controlled with that. You're going to turn your pressure output way down low. Like I think when I was doing mine, I was rolling it down to probably 12 PSI to do that kind of stuff. And then, obviously when you lay your other colors, you can do a little bit higher pressure, but when you're doing those really controlled soft transitions all the way down on pressure, you're going to have to thin your paint. You're going to have to do your color transition. Like if you're starting in a slightly off black, then you're only adding a little tiny bit of white color to move it up from there. Or in this case, if you wanted to do a super pale bluish gray as your additive, I think that can add some extra color into this and it'll shift you just a tiny bit towards blue, but while still reading black. Now, when you get towards the harder stuff, then so that's where we get into it here. So when we're looking at the belts, I think you've done it correctly that the shoulder, and I think the belts are probably where they need to be. I think that's fine. When we move into the carbonate and the armor plating here, I think that they need some sharper edges to them, but they also need a little bit more transition in the mid-tone as well to sell that idea. And then when you look at the hammer that's on top here, that needs to come to absolute white on the edging of it, and you have to go to absolute black in some other places to go that color shift and make it a harder transition from those kinds of things, while still doing obviously your non-metallic read for that. But you have to have absolute black up in the metal, and you have to have absolute white, and do a little bit of travel in between. But your travel has to be over shorter distances, if I'm explaining that correctly. Whereas on the carbonate, you can travel dark to light over a wider distance, I guess. And that's my recommendations for capturing the different color textures in there. If we can actually, to push that point home, let's flick back to the group shot at the beginning for a second.
Okay.
Okay. Look at the bases for a second. And he has sold us on the idea that that they're standing on some kind of hard metal plating or a carbonate plating. And I think that transition works well, and he's gone to absolute white. Like when you look at these whole models from a distance, that's the place where it appears that absolute white happens, is on the edge of those things. So that's what I'm getting at in general with that.
Yeah, he's so strong in the contrast on the base that, like, you know, when you zoom way out, right, and you look at this, you just let your eyes relax, you see the bases, not the figures.
Yeah.
Right? Because those have got the actual bright shots on it where it's going to that pure white in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's got a couple other spots on the robot models. Like on the true robot models, there's one at the back row that is some kind of werewolf robot pet, I think. And then there's one that's second to the left in the middle row. So he's getting it a little bit there. But I think on some other spaces it needs to get a little bit further with the metallic stuff. What else would I say about this? Let's talk real briefly about the purples. I think overall you can go a little bit, and not much, but a little bit bolder on some of the purples to make them a better feature color. Because the places that show up here are the hair on your big hammer wielder, and also on the biker. But on most of the other places, that purple is dark enough still that it doesn't read from a good distance. So I think that you can be a little bit more. I want to be careful about this because the whole goal is to stay muted color spectrum control. So you don't want something that's gonna blow it out. But I still think that it can be a little bit lighter in color tone overall.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it feels like a few more of that where you're actually taking it to that level would help sell the overall effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then there would be those points of interest drawing you kind of back up into the figures off of the base.
Yeah. So in closing, I hope that some of that discussion can help you out when you think about representing the different textures, but still staying in the same color spectrum. I don't want to take away from the fact that what you've done here is a great challenge, and I think you're very worthy for taking it on. I think you've got the groundwork so that you have it in you to do that. But like any other technique that's advanced like this, it's going to take some practice to do it. So keep at it, and I'd like to see you revisit this in a couple months, and we'll see depending upon the subject matter of what you choose, I think we'll see some good differences.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree on the boldness of the choice, and in that part, this, you deserve absolute props. It's a really great effort. It's a very striking and unique force, and you really struck out to say, like, hey, I'm gonna make this bold statement. I'm really gonna swing for the fence on this. This is painting bravely and exactly the kind of stuff I like to see. So, even if there is still some room for growth, I think absolute full marks for just being bold and saying, hey, I'm gonna plant my flag here and do something brave. All right. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. Okay. So let's keep going. Next up, we've got Lloyd Hiller, which has given us a Space Marine, and he is looking for some feedback. Then we've got Harlem Bad Dunkers, who has a nice little dwarf bust for us. And then we've got Chris Miller, who's pushing to improve. He says continues. So I'll tell you what, Eric, do you want to take the Mr. Space Marine here?
Sure.
From Lloyd? I'll take the dwarfy bust. I've been working with some busts recently and having a good time. I feel like that's top of mind for me. If Kieran, you want to take our next high contrast War Machine miniature, at least I think that's what this is. I feel like it is. All right. At any rate, let's start with Lloyd.
All right, Mr. Space Marine. So first of all, some really good, good old Ultramarine. Let me flip through a couple of versions here. I like the basing, using those different textures. Looks like you've got some stones or pebbles from, maybe outside, sitting on top of the crackled ground. A little bit of foliage there. I think those all work together fairly well. Those rocks could even kind of fool me as a bone a little bit. Do we have any other angles on this guy? All right, that's a good one, actually. Why don't you go back to that one? So I'm seeing a couple of really good, you've got, a good, strong blue base coat. You've done, I think, a really good job putting the gold on there, giving it some depth, and then highlight, even in that small space and being a flat surface. And you could probably push that a little bit more at that left shoulder kind of tip right by his chest. That's probably one of the highest, brightest spots on there. Could go a little bit brighter, maybe. Even using, what is it, the Retributor Gold or the Liberator Gold, the lighter of the two. You've done some good highlighting of the blue. You've got kind of the black lining inside, and then a highlight on the shoulder pauldron, and then you've got some scratches, and even the scratches are highlighted, and some really interesting things going on there. It looks like you've scratched up your decal, or at least made it look a little bit more. And that checks on his mohawk look like they've got some damage to it. So there's some really good things going on there. Everything looks very weathered on that gun. You do need to drill that barrel out, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the thing that I think this guy looks great, and you're demonstrating a lot of techniques, and the battle damage is really cool. I would have you push in two areas. One, I think your blue is generally the same color throughout, and you've created a very consistent application of that blue, which is fantastic. What I would challenge you to do is get some darker blues on the underside. So right now we're looking at the top of his pauldron. If we were to look at the bottom of his pauldron, I'd want you to use a different blue for that. Let's see, I've got a Cantor blue, which I don't know if it's darker than in tone or in shade than the ultramarine blue, but even mixing that with some blacks or something like that to get it darker, so that these blues become kind of some of the brightest points of the model, rather than the medium tone all over, right? And I think then the other thing would be some of your battle damage. And this is easy. It's hard to think randomly about battle damage. as I'm looking here, your battle damage seems to be generally just the scrape and then the highlight underneath it, which, you know, maybe this is the model where you're practicing that and getting that on there. If you can vary that up a little bit more, so right now looking at the left pauldron and the right pauldron, you've got the same kind of two kind of, they're very symmetrical, those scrapes. So you know, that kind of takes the illusion away. So as much as you can vary that up, and then in addition to scrapes, you know, you can take a sponge, or I just take an old brush, get a little bit of the whatever your scratched look is, and, you know, right there in that front corner pauldron that we talked about being super shiny, you know, I might start in that middle corner and start painting kind of blotchiness just a little bit up towards the, you know, the top, and then, you know, pick up the brush, move a little bit, and put another couple of dots down, as if I've kind of started corroding away, you know, some of those spots in those things. So if you're going to go that way, you know, some of those variations of different types of battle damage can be really good. Otherwise, you know, I think you've got a great base here. I would challenge you to do some blending and do some variation on the blue. I think would be the biggest thing you could do to help kind of make this model more dramatic. And then, you know, drilling out the barrel of the gun so that we believe that this is absolutely a gun. Any other thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, actually, I remember now. It didn't click for me when this model first pulled up, but Lloyd put up his first painted model to us last month. And I remember that he mentioned that he had been a student of all kinds of videos. He's watching, he's studying, he's learning, and his first model was smooth like butter, just like this one is.
Yeah.
Right. Smooth application of everything. He has a really great foundation of understanding already.
Absolutely.
And this is just him just adding a few other experimental things, which you touched on, with his battle damage experiments and weathering, etc. But I see progress already, Lloyd. Great progress from an already good foundation. So well done, buddy.
Absolutely.
I think if Lloyd keeps at it like one ultramarine a month, right? Like if we in a year from now we're gonna just like have this sort of platonic form of the ultramarine, like he'll just have perfected the whole thing, you know what I mean? He'll be doing like this ultra high contrast reflective ultramarine that'll just blow us all away. I can't wait.
He'll finally merge non-metallic metal and true metallic metal techniques into a perfect version of metal in a miniature form.
But I look forward to it, man. Really, honestly, we can see the growth, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. So Harlem Bad Dunkers saying he's getting back into some hobbying. And so he said he's never done a bust before, and this is his first one. This is an awesome chance for me to talk about the difference when you're painting busts. Okay. So he said he wanted a lateral lighting situation, but the photos are lit from a high front angle. So I think that means you're telling me that your lighting in reality is different than your lighting in paint. Okay, that's cool. Just make sure you try to have your lighting match. That way it just reinforce, don't work against yourself. Now, let's get into the meat of this. Okay. So the first thing that happens when you paint a bust for the first time is you try to apply a lot of the same techniques that you would apply when you're painting a normal size miniature. And the problem there is that a lot of them are going to fail you. Because the scale is so much bigger, right? Like this guy is so like, I mean, size of the miniature, he might only be like, I don't know how big this bust is, like what exact scale, if he's like 1/200th or 1 whatever. But there's a lot of different sort of sizes of busts. But the point is, either way, you're still working in a scale that's titanically bigger than a 28 mil model. And where I see this being the most pronounced is with stuff like your lighting that you're trying to catch here. So the light tells me you've painted, so you told me the light's coming from this direction, because I can see the reflection here in the beard, I can see the reflect. The side of the fur is bigger than this side of the fur, or sorry, brighter than this side of the fur, and so on and so forth. This side of the face and whatnot. That's all fine. The problem is that when you paint to this scale, you have to add. You got to keep pushing. Okay. Because like, here's the easy example. The beard, like this doesn't look like light reflection. I mean, I've interpreted that because you mentioned the lateral lighting thing. If you hadn't mentioned that, I would have just assumed this was sort of like places where his beard had gone gray. I need a lot more shadow in the hair, and I need a lot. I need these transitions to be smoother, light reflections that are smoother, transitions that are smoother, all that kind of stuff, right? Because again, the scale of this is so big. Like the individual hairs as they're molded here are massive, right? Again, I don't know how big this guy actually is, but I mean it's big enough. You've got it here on the leather. Like this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like here you nailed it because you have all this wonderful like texture and stippling and cuts and scrapes in the leather. I love this. This is fantastic. Okay. So, but when we get to things like the hair, it's rather flat. I don't have any dark tones. I need to see some dark browns, purples, whole reds. I need to see some highlights that are catching a little more into the orange spectrum or warm red, where the light is hitting, you know, red hair and popping it out and making it sort of, you know, the yellow light is going to turn red hair orange and that kind of thing. I need to see the gold have a lot stronger reflection points and shadows, things like that. You know, with your armor, you went for a scratch and dent. I like that, but it doesn't, like, the problem is it just looks kind of too scuffed. Like, we need thinner strikes at this. And overall more variation in the metal tone. One thing you can play with on busts, if you're going to do real metal, is you can play with graphite. You can grind up pencil lead, or you can actually buy artist's graphite. It's perfect for doing this kind of damaged metal you want on steel. It is the messiest thing you will ever work with in your life, so do it outside. Like literally apply it and then seal it, because otherwise it's a freaking nightmare forever. But it does have an incredible look of like scuffed shadowed armor. It's a magical effect that's kind of worth the trouble if you're willing to go the distance. When we get to the skin, this is the shooting match with busts. Like most busts heavily feature skin, so that's the game. The name of the game is skin tone. And so, like, you need to go so much farther than when you're painting a normal miniature. I need reds, purples, blues, yellows. I need all of them in here. Like, I need more red in the lower parts of his cheek, in the end of his nose, here in the recesses. I need purples here under his eye, pink tones where the blood is showing through the thin eyebrow. I need pink lines and purples in there, maybe a little stuff like that, maybe a little yellow on the top reflection to show it's closer to the warm light here on the crinkles and wrinkles in his head. I need some sepias back here to show the tone of like tan lines and stuff like that. Blue tones down here near his beard where we've got like thinner hair, or to imply the colder shadows they're recessed. Same thing here. That'd be a nice place to work that in here near this beard, where this would be in shadow near a warm light would grab a cold shadow. All that kind of stuff. Like, just you keep playing with it. So overall, like, I like what you did here. I know I just spent a ton of time telling you things you can improve. I like what you did here. Like, I love the lighting experimentation. The eyes are nice. Like, you're selling him looking toward the light. I picture like a door being opened in his dark, you know, dwarven cavey room. But what we need to do is just go more. With a bust, you always just more. Like, that's the key. You just keep pushing. All right, because you've got this bigger scale, so you need to blow the detail way out. But all in all, this is like, it's good. You've got a really, really nice base here. I mean, and for your first bust, this is really good work. Like, crazy good for your first bust, man. I keep at it, keep playing with this kind of stuff. There's a lot of fun. If you're looking for other busts to play with, there's a lot of makers out there of busts at like really good economical prices. There are some very expensive busts in the world, but there's lots of producers of like busts you can get for $20, $30. There happens to be a bust from AMSA, from the Canadian miniature thing that they just released of a Ninja Girl that's super amazing. They have done several really awesome busts, so check that out. You can look them. Is it, Kieran? You know this. Is it AM? I can never remember the letters.
Yeah, AMPSA.
There you go. AMPSA.
AMSA.
Thank you. AMSA. Yes. I always get the letters mixed up because I want to put a C in there for like Canada, but I know it's not in there, but you know, I want to. So that's it's a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, that's a good plug because that model was designed with 2 different head options as well. So
ooh, there you
choose the masked or the unmasked Ninja Girl.
Playing with more flesh or less flesh. There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm gonna get mine next weekend.
Oh, are you really? That's awesome. Nice. Chris Miller. With this crazy thing. I don't know what this thing is. War Machine's got some crazy figs, yo.
It is indeed. Well, Chris really took something on here, and he's certainly applied some pretty advanced techniques to this. In his description here, he says that his goal is that in 2019 he wants to get to competition level painting. So I think that's the approach that I'm going to take when talking about this, Chris. So let's start with the good. The good is color transition that you've done throughout this thing, and thinking about how that flows between dark to light over curved surfaces. I've had this challenge myself, in truth, and I think many of us do, is how do you highlight a curved surface, especially if we've come from, you know, some background of edge highlighting and building color up on things rather than, you know, building highlights up rather than working towards shadow. That's the challenge that many of us have. So it takes quite a bit of effort to get to this point even. But the truth that I have for you is to get to competition level painting, those next increments and those pushes to the next levels of plateaus are harder for each step forward. The weight is heavy to the competition painter. That's for damn sure. So let's talk about some overall things here. I think that when people think of a lot of colors that they work with, when you see that under an intense light, and when you see it in reality, I mean, even if I look at my blue lamp that is sitting here on my desk right here, it's a navy blue cowling to it. But at some points, because of the lights that are shining above around my room, there comes to a few points on it where it's absolute white, where the light catches it, because it's a mildly reflective surface. And I think that that's what you're absolutely going towards capturing here. And I think you've got a good sensibility about that. Even on the rivets around this model, there is a particular light catch. There's that line of highlight where across the curved surfaces, because it's either a cone shape or a cylinder shape, there still is that sort of horizon line that gets created. So good on you for thinking that through and trying to capture that. Now, I think the offering that I would have, let's break down a few different instances of it. So if we look at this sort of shielding for the gun plate, the plating that goes around the gun, you've selected a couple of points of light there where that's going to be the spot where the light captures and shines on the most. So you got a cast highlight across horizontally, those things there. Similarly, on the shoulder pad of this gunner and all the way up the length of the armor that's on these horses, you have one hard line there where that light captures. I think in a lot of these instances, you have to think about the scale of the piece that you're highlighting, is what I'm going to say about when you choose how sharp or how diffused, to use a word that Eric used earlier on metallics, to put that thing. And so here's what I'd say. When you have a bigger armor plate, then the sharpness of your absolute highlight has to be a little bit wider, right? And it has to be a little bit more diffuse about how it goes along that. So it seems almost about right on that shoulder pad of the guy. It seems maybe a little bit sharp when we see the head-on shot of these horses, but it certainly seems too sharp to me on the shield of the gun. So I think I would encourage you to diffuse that a little bit, make that highlight band a little bit wider in that space to capture that. I think you can do the same when we look at when we follow the line of that gun cowling down, and we go to that place where it gets into the curvature near the K-door symbol at the front of the gun platform. That's another space where I think that can be a little bit wider because you're sort of sweeping along an angle there. And I know this doesn't sound like we're getting nitpicky here, but this is kind of what we're going for in the competition painter development angle. It's these kinds of very subtle things that we have to think about a little bit deeper. Okay, let's move on to another thing. Can you give me a head-on shot? Find that head-on shot of one of these guys. I think it might be the second frame that he gave us. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I want to compare what you've done here with the gold. Okay, so there's probably a better technical term for this, but how these horses are being shackled to pull the gun, whatever this cross piece is that you've done in gold here, you've chosen that the center is the highlight point, right? That's where the light source goes. But yet if your eye casts up, then the light points are sort of to the sides of the gun itself because you've chosen to do the gun in metallic, which I'll come back and talk about here in a second. But how that matches up with the black armor that you've done on these horses, it means that, to me, it tells me that the inside line of that armor highlight has to be stronger or wider than it is on the outside because of the way that you've chosen to match up those highlight points. That's what it tells me. What I'd actually prefer that you do, though, is that you shift that around and you have your gold brighter on the outside points. Do that banding a little bit wider, and that matches up a little bit better as it flows back towards the back of the model and up onto the gun shielding. Okay, so that's the overarching color spectrum things that I think I would suggest. Next thing to think about for color competition is we have to do the same sort of pushing of contrast a little bit more heavily in the silvers that you got, because you've used some real metallics for the cannon, the wheels, and its framework struts. And we need to go to absolute black on some of these places under the cannon and force the light here. We can't have as much. So when you look at the rings of that cannon, you have your highlight coming around all the way underneath. But there's a true horizon line there. You can see it just because of the light that you've taken this photo in. But build on that, push on that. So when you see that natural highlight line, just because of the way that your light in the surrounding area, the environment where you're taking this photo is, lean into it. Make that your horizon line, where that is where you have a line of highlight right at that horizon, and then it's going to go darker underneath there. And use your metallic paints to reinforce that. One thing, and I know that you got it in you, because if we go to a spin to a side shot for a second and look at the wheels, the other thing that I want to compliment you on, which I think is fantastic, is you've worked in hints of color reflection on these things. So even though you might think that the points right underneath the cowling, and as the wheels start to turn underneath the wheel, become your darkest points, certainly the flat side should, but you have actually wisened up and understood that snow is going to reflect up onto the bottom half of that wheel. and you've dealt with that appropriately. So fantastic there. I also think that it's great that you pulled a little bit of blue into the reflection on the top side of those wheel panels as well. So that's the kind of thing that really shows promise for you, Chris. And I think that you need to just lean into that on actual true metallics a little bit more, and just do lots of studying. You got to look at lots of reference photos, and spend hours doing that, just as much as you spend extra hours painting these models to go to competition level. So that's a bit long-winded, but maybe, Vince, if you got other things that you'd like to add on, since you've really truly been there more than me.
No, I mean, I think you hit all the notes that I would hit. But here's the final thing I'll say. If you want to get to competition level next year, whatever that is in your mind, then go to the next competition you have available this year, period. Or whenever. I don't care when. Like, literally go to the next available competition and the one after that. Do not wait. Do not hold back. Get something. Get a piece together. Maybe it's this one. Maybe you integrate this feedback and take it. Just do it. The best way to get to competition level is to compete, period. And when you compete, get feedback from the judges. Because they're going to judge your piece and break it down with an eye toward competition. You will never have a rougher time at a competition than the first time you show up to it, period. Because you don't know how the judges are thinking. You haven't gotten the feedback before. It's the hardest thing to do. So once you get over that and they start giving you instruction and you start integrating that and you compete more, you will start thinking like judges do. The best thing you can do to compete is compete. That's your best training, period. Right? Yeah. Don't wait.
Agreed.
Start now. I see a lot of people say this, like they're trying to get to like an imaginary finish line in your head. That's like saying, I want to get really good at baseball before I play baseball. No, just play baseball and try your hardest, right? And keep getting feedback. Then if your goal is to get to the majors, that's fine, but you got to play a lot of baseball first, right? Okay. Let's see. So next up, Tam the Third. We've got a little kit bashing effort for an exalted champion for his World Eaters. Okay. Then we got a big old spider guy from Jesse. And then we've got John Gallant with a very interesting miniature. Gar Shatterkeel. That's a neat mini. Gale Force 9 has some interesting D&D minis. Okay, so I'll happily take this World Eater guy if somebody will take the gross spider that I can't do because spiders freak me out. Eric, would you like the big giant spider?
Sure can.
All right, and then Kieran, if you want Gar Shatterkeel.
I'm just going to call him Crabby Hand.
Yeah, Mr. Crab Hand. Sounds good. Okay, so let's start out Tam the Third. Let's see what you got. So he says it's his first kit bashing effort. Very cool. I thought aren't World Eaters? I think it's something different. I'm thinking of a different group. World Eaters aren't the purple ones. World Eaters are red. Okay. Anyway, so Body as a Blood Warriors champion. So he wanted some thoughts on how well the conversion works and feedback on the paint. Sure. Well, I'll tell you right off the rip, the conversion works fine. I have zero problem with that. I mean, like the armor for a lot of these guys can cross over between sort of AOS and 40K pretty easily with the addition of the tech bits in the backpack like you did. I mean, you added the right stuff. So, yep, he's in that world now. It's that easy. So I have no problem with any of that. So conversion-wise, it actually looked really clean. I don't see anything in the way of gaps or anything like that. So that's all solid. Now, just to talk about the sort of paint, things I really like. You did a great job with the red on the armor. I really love it. You went to a nice deep color. Your contrast is fantastic. That is solid tonal variation. Take a drink. So like that, I very much like to see that. Like the knee pads especially are I'm loving it. Call it McDonald's because I'm loving it. The sword is also a point of particular happiness for me, as you did the wonderful trick to make this look hot. You kept it black. Like he kept the whole thing dark. It's not really black. It's this very dark black red, this whole red kind of mixed with some deep browns and blacks. Beautiful. Exactly what I like to see. And then you pop these heat spots out. So that looks nice because they really stand out against that dark color. The part here, so this is the shot that I'll take in for a little more detailed feedback. You know, you mentioned the gold. I don't have any problem with it. You picked a good gold to contrast red because you don't want to use a real red gold. The blighted gold is a fine enough color. It's kind of deeper and darker, a more antique gold. So I think that works just fine. We've got some nice edges on there, some nice shadows built in. All that works fine for me. The skin, I think, is now, and this could be a problem of highlighting. It looks like we got a little, like, not highlighting, I'm sorry, of overexposure of the lighting. It feels like the lighting is a little bit hot here. So like maybe we have a direct light kind of situation. But his skin feels like it could use some more sort of variation, especially around here and in this area. Maybe a little more red tones, stuff like that. It's a little hard to tell. And then similarly on the arm, like the exposed flesh he's got on the arm, it's too harsh, right? Like we go straight from almost this high flesh tone into like this purple into this. It looks streaky. Now, again, all of this could be a symptom of the sort of overexposure. If that's the case, and this is much smoother in life and we're blowing away the midtones with the light, you can feel free to ignore this. But what I think I want to see is more of a natural flesh tone here, smoothing the deep transition to the highlight. Whereas up here, I want to see more red pink tones here in the forehead, here in the cheeks, stuff like that. Maybe even a little built into the lip. I mean, I know this guy's a chaos guy, but his lip appears to be the exact same color as the rest of his skin. I'm assuming he has lips still, that Korn has not stolen his lips from him. But, you know, I don't know. The chaos gods are fickle. So overall, beyond that, I think what I'd love to see is you kick your basing up a little bit. Not that I don't enjoy, you know, some cork with some stuff over top of it and then a skull, but something, you know, create some variation there, pull at that cork, take some chips out of it, put some other stuff on, have a dead tuft you work in, have some color variation in the stone, work in some red tones into that. Red tones are very natural, and like red and violet type tones are very natural in stone. Brown tones, green tones, I don't care, whatever, just something down there, right? So it looks like dirt, it looks like weather, it looks like something is going on besides just this like very abrupt gray. And then all of a sudden we've got this brown piece over here, right? I need a little more action down here. But overall, this is really good. Your edge highlighting is sharp where it exists. Your armor looks wonderful. So, and I like the blue. I feel like I need one more position of the blue to really sell it. You kind of got it a little in the boots. I don't know where you'd put it. That's a tough one to say. Maybe something down here on the base that has it just to pull it down. We've kind of got a little bit of blue stuck up here and nothing down there, but I don't know if that's really a tackleable solution on this particular mini. But all in all, it's good. I like it a lot. All right. Big creepy spider from Jesse Pinnock. Is everybody still there? Hello?
Sorry, I muted while I was heavy breathing.
Oh, okay.
Were you heavy breathing about the spider?
I'm working a fine detail brush, and I'm just right into it. So, all right, he's looking for this thing to pop some more. Let's see, and I think, you know, usually what we're talking about again when you pop is having high contrast, light next to dark, and alternating. So, for instance, this guy's face and eyes, that Arachnarch spider's face and eyes, are popping just great. And I'm actually okay that the body and his thorax kind of start blending darker. It looks like we've got maybe a stonehorn head in there, or not a stonehorn, a stegodon head in there. But maybe I just don't know this model that well. But we start getting darker underneath the howdah, which is good, which is great. And I think then the next place you want to look at is either you go by where light would hit, and that's the top of the second segment of the legs that are the highest up. Get those as bright as you have the face, but let them stay as dark as they are down by the body. And then you're gonna have the face, and then each kind of that top knee of each of the legs would pop, and so that would help a lot. And then when you get up to the howdah, you want those. You want to make sure that there's some readability in that brown on the wood, that it is wood. And so in that case, it could be aged a little bit more. Instead of being a rich brown, it could go to a gray brown, or something to that effect. But I think what you're looking for at your next stage of pop, or as you're moving through your next level of pop, is going to be the green on the goblins. And right now, from the photography that we have, they just look really dark without a lot of highlights. Now I know you have the red paint on there, and maybe that's what you're wanting to have pop more. Or maybe you're thinking that that's going to help them pop. What's going to work better for them, I think, is going to be at least the face and the upper arms. Take those to a brighter green color. And again, not all the model has to be the same green color. Even with goblins, you can have darker legs and feet, and then move up to brighter torso and even brighter face. All of that works just fine. But brighten up their faces, brighten up their arms, and a little bit of their upper torso. And even if you just from here, you're taking, and highlighting that with another green. And then if you want to go back to the red, if you've gotten up really bright, what's nice about green and red is they're high contrast, or they're complementary colors. So, having brighter green next to the red is only going to help that red pop even more. So you don't have to worry about, you don't need a dark green to make the red pop. A medium and getting into highlighted green, high greens and yellows is going to be okay for that red to pop on its own, or next to it. And so if you're looking for this model to pop, you got to find those areas that you want people to look at and travel. With big models, you want them to travel around the model. And what I like about where you're at so far is that you're embracing some of those dark areas, and now you just need to pick out some areas to brighten up and take to those next levels. And you're easily demonstrating it, in the head and in some other places. Now just figure out what locations you want to execute on, and take those up further, so that we can see the coolness of the models themselves, but how you've converted or positioned them around on the base and next to each other. So them's my thoughts.
Good stuff. Yeah, this is one of the awards of all time for me for creepiest miniatures. This thing, ugh. It's a super cool model, but man, does it creep me out. All right. I'm not a fan of spiders, in case we're not keeping up with that. All right, so Gar Shatterkeel. This is a very unique miniature. Kieran, are you on mute now?
Yes, I am on mute now.
It's going around.
And it's not because I was breathing heavy, I promise. Before I get into it here, I want your opinion on something, guys. All this sort of white-gray stuff scattered around this model, do you think, in your opinion, that that's intended to be seafoam or barnacles?
I think it's barnacles.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a coral dude, and he is like, he lives under the water so much that he literally has coral on him.
He's just not moving around enough to
apparently
take barnacles off. Okay,
you got to take better care of yourself.
I think you're underestimating the devastating power of barnacles.
They're lightning fast how quick they get on you. Yeah.
I just learned about a parasitic barnacle that attaches itself to crustacean.
Right now. Just stop. No more.
Puts its tendrils all through its limbs and stuff. It's nuts.
Okay, let's talk about this model.
Yeah.
So first point I want to say about this, John, is I think that your efforts of contrast on this thing are the most attractive part about it. The fact that you have defined the musculature of this model, the folds in his robe, and all these other pieces, even the barnacles, by working the contrast and really appreciating that. So that's the winning point. There's two other things that you were said in your comments here that you wanted some specific feedback on, though, and that was composition, and you also said you were struggling a little bit with water effects because you were trying to make him look like he was in a pool of water. So I'll try to touch on a couple of those. First off, there's two approaches here. One, and the problem area that we need to work with when we're talking about composition is that crab claw, because it is a bold red, and the next frame actually shows it off a little bit better. Vince, if you want to flip to that one while we're talking. It's a pretty bold red, right? And when you look at this model, it draws you there because that's a more powerful color than the other colors that are on the predominant part of the model. So how do we deal with that? Well, let me give you a couple options. You don't have to do all these things, but I'll give you a couple options. Option one, and probably the easiest way, is that if you treat the back end of that spear like a spike of coral, then you can paint that in a similar color. That's probably the easy way to triangulate because you have a little bit of coral on the base there.
Now, what if you treat it like a spike of Steve instead of Carl?
Coral. It's a 5-letter word.
Just messing with you. Go ahead.
Option number two, you can treat all these barnacles as a coral reef that's growing on this guy. Because you know, barnacles can grow on a guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, corals can grow on a guy too. So you can work that. Or option number three, you do away with that red color altogether and go to something different, which is I would stay on the same side of the color wheel as your seafoam green and blue. And so that means that if you want something to look different texture-wise over there, then you can go into the purple spectrum and do it in a sort of soft, sort of dark plum, kind of a purple that comes up to the tips, going towards, you know, and doing the same kind of contrast leveling that you've done on the robes over there. I still think that to balance it, though, you still do the end of that spear in whatever color. If you change this to purple, then you put purple over there also. So there's a couple options. Now, to execute those things, I also have another possibility as well, and that is you come away from the bright orange that you've done on there and think about corals that you've seen that are a little bit softer, and they sometimes incorporate a little bit of pink and softer tone into that. So I think you soften this down from being a bolder red, and you go into more of the pastel-y kind of color spectrum like you've done in the skin tone of this guy, because I think it would fall in compositionally wise, even though the carapace of that crab claw obviously is a harder texture. I think that if you come into that pastel range, it'll actually come in line a little bit better. Yeah, so there's your crab problem solved in several different ways. None of them involve any kind of clinical ointment. So be happy for that.
Which is always the way you hope it's solved. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Now, the other thing to touch on, I'm afraid I don't, from the snapshots that you've taken, I don't get a good look of how that base is reading as far as the pour and the water effect you've done on it. I can see that there's some that's creeping up on the cloak itself. So I know that it exists. But I don't know that I have anything directly to say about it because I can't really tell what's going on and whether it's problematic or not from this flat angle over here. I would say this, though, that when you're doing with these water effects, you have there's two products predominantly that I've worked with. One of those is a very liquid one, which I think is probably what you're using here. That is obviously going to get spread and it's going to go in between all the little bits of flock and surround all the things and lay on flat and spread out, etc. So you don't have any control of that. It's just going to lay on level no matter what you do. The other product you could do is you can get some gel consistency stuff that if you want to actually create a pool that is controlled and has an edge and has a border, then you can do it with that. And then you can build up the edge a little bit. And then if you want to, you can come to that absolute clear thing and put a few drops in there so that you can get a level, more crystal clear space in the center of it. Again, I can't really tell what you're going after here on the base, but that's just talking generally about a couple of different approaches that you could use. The last thing that you had brought up in your comments that I want to touch on real briefly here is that you wanted this guy himself to look wet, top to bottom, and ask the question of whether you should cover him in a gloss varnish to do that. And my quick, categorical, and emphatic answer is no, do not do that. Do not paint this guy gloss top to bottom. If you want to catch some light gleams in things like that to make him look wet, you can achieve that by building up a few select points of light where the water is catching and pooling or reflecting its best. And you can go brighter in those places and go towards white. Think of it like picking out places of polished gemstones, if you've seen that technique done. Or alternately, if you want to go look back upon something we started out the month with, the job by Bleep Bloop, where he does some highlights with some hard white, but softens the edging of it a little bit so it diffuses in. You can try out that if you want to, but that would be the way that I'd suggest to do it. Do not do a gloss varnish on this guy.
No. Yeah, I hear. It's like everybody in their miniature painting career at some point is going to come up with the idea of, I want to do a wet miniature. Should I just slather them in gloss varnish? Yep. And it does not work. It's not going to achieve that. It is going to make your miniature look like it's slathered in gloss varnish because that's all the gloss varnish does. The problem is it doesn't create the reflections. There's a scale problem. That's why we paint in matte paints. Yep. And it's unbelievably not going to end up how you want. So there you go. Okay. Let's see. We got two more. So how about we just tackle these together, guys?
And then timeout time?
And timeout time. Yep, exactly. So Ryan Eastling says he's continuing on with his Space Marines, and he's going for Armies on Parade. So let's take a look at these Blood Angels. I mean, I think my quick feedback for you is basically exactly so two sort of quick thoughts. One is, like, I don't know the standards you're going for. I don't know how long you took on them, that kind of thing. But the tonal variation thing seems very strong to me here. If we go back to the World Eater and you can look at the red that was in that, that's the kind of thing I'd love to see with the red. The yellow is very yellow and it's very consistently yellow. I'd love to see some ochres and sepias worked into the shadows there to give me more variation on that. Like you did it with the guy's flesh in this face. Like we have some variation here, but then the armor plates are just big flat armor plates. Like there's screws and rivets and stuff here, and none of them are picked out with shadow, right? So like at the very least, we want to create some kind of variation, some edges, something to make that all pop a little more. Because right now they're very flat.
Yeah, I think you give him the same advice that Eric was given to Lloyd a little bit earlier on his Ultramarine. That there just needs to be some color shift on each of those surfaces. You probably don't necessarily want to go as far as what Chris Miller was doing on his armored cannon contraption, but that's at least you got to go somewhere towards that to create that color leveling on all these armor plates too.
Yep. Now, one quick piece of very positive feedback. You did make their feet dirty. They're walking through dirty, muddy earth, and you mudded up their feet.
Dust feet.
Dirty feet. So dirty very feet. Good there. Yeah, I think that is really your major challenge. There's a couple other things I could say, but I think that's really probably the major one is I would, as you go forward with these, push yourself on your tonal variation on these guys. Okay, and then this is a Night Haunt terrain piece. Okay, so this is an interesting way to end the month. It is a piece of terrain. It's a spooky tree.
Well, it's not the end of the month. It's just time.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry. To our intermission, because we're totally doing this here in October, as we all know. Yes. So this is our spooky tree, which is nice here in October, as it's obviously Halloween season. So this is completely thematically appropriate.
Ooh.
Yeah. I mean, as a piece of terrain, sure. Like, again, I don't know what you're ultimately aiming for. You got a nice little, I see the little cross for the little, grave marker. That's cool. Some exposed roots. Looks like we did a little wireframe tree with some stuff around it. And we kind of made that. That's cool. I mean, the quick thoughts off the top of my head, the moss it looks like you set little moss on the tree. Like, it doesn't feel like a natural extension of the tree itself, so you probably want to do a little more. It feels like, and what I mean by that is, like, we have these very thick spots and then bare stick and then thick spot. So, probably some little spots of it where it's not hanging as much could really help here. Along the same line, little sticks, some more little sticks of the tree. Like, this is a tree that all has, this area of the branch is almost the same size as this area of the branch. Like, one of the things you want to watch out for when you do these twist trees is that you vary the size of the sticks, right? We need to get into small, tiny sticks here. Like, this upper Y frame here is the most troublesome, because, like, we've got this very strong extension. Terrain Tutor has a great sort of tutorial on doing the wireframe tree style.
This tree actually looks pretty natural. There's some spaces where you can see that he's mashed some things together because.
Oh yeah, maybe he's doing cut sticks. Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
I bet it's actually sticks that he glued together. Yeah, there you go.
Well, he's
Like,
glued
right there.
together and he's used some putty because if you look super closely, you can actually see a little bit of fingerprint marks in some spaces.
Oh yeah, there you go.
So yeah, it seems to me that he's used a natural source. He's probably done the roots with some green stuff. And put a little bit of texture on top of those. So it's actually kind of crafty how he brought it together. And then probably covered over the major obvious joins with his draping foliage.
Yeah, which is good. I like all that. So yeah, I would say that if that's the case, if we've got natural sticks, good call, good eye there, Kieran, with some green stuff or something like that in there. Yeah, smaller sticks, like more. Trees are thick at the bottom and thin at the top. I mean, that's that is to say in terms of individual, branches or whatever. Beyond that, roots should be darker down here. These things are amongst the mud. Like, you have some kind of water effect here. So, like, this water, it would rain and theoretically this water would run over these things. So they should be wet and have more greenness to them or something like that. So I think that's probably a thing that strikes out at me. But I mean, it's terrain, so I don't want to be too harsh, because the reality is it's really good looking terrain. Like, it's perfectly great for a table. So, I don't know the level you're going for. I hate doing terrain, so I don't tend to push it. And maybe you're in the same boat as me, in which case, if you're going for, like, if your goal here is have a solid piece of terrain for the table, you have achieved and surpassed that. So let me be very, very clear on that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this has some good character to it for sure. And he's paid attention to getting all sorts of textures on his ground works.
Yeah.
So instincts are good there. But yeah, I do reinforce what you said. I think we need a couple more spread out of foliage on the tree branches themselves. But yeah, not much else. I think it has good character with the basis of it. And you don't want to overdo it, because obviously if this is going to be something you play on, it's got to have some kind of durability too. So we got to strike a middle ground.
Yep. All right. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that. I like when people share unusual stuff like that. So we're going to take a little intermission. We're going to grab our coffee and take a shower, change our clothes. We'll be back in just a second, and we'll finish up the month. All right, we're back. So Kieran is back with me. Eric went to get coffee, never came back. So R.I.P. Eric. We're sorry we lost you, but you know, that's all right. Much love, brother. But that's okay. With the two of us shall soldier on. That's a tongue twister.
For those watching at home, it's garden gnome season in Wisconsin. And what I mean by that is this is the time of year where people go out to their gardens and collect their garden gnomes and bring them inside.
That's a good
point.
point.
I think that people suspect that Eric might be one of them and has been stolen.
He has the look. Yeah, it can happen. All right. So we're just going to jump back in here. Let me go ahead and lock on myself and then screen share up. There we go. So we're going to start out with a couple from Zab. So Zab has a nice little sort of carapace thing. He said he was specifically looking for something Starship Trooperish. Tried a lot of loaded brush on the skin, and he wanted some feedback on that in the shell. And it'd be awesome if we can give feedback on that. Sure. So let's take a look here with this gross thing. This is kind of a hideous monster, but that's cool. All right. That's a scary, scary thing. Okay, so let's talk about compositionally some stuff going on here. We've got a nice skin tone moving from sort of purple up to that. Then we've got these little bumps of like something. I don't know, these little weird raised bumps. And then we've got this same thing here. Now, he put this little red hood up here from the Adeptus guy. This looks like the thing basically coming out of here, I assume. And then he knew he had to counter this red, so he put a little red thing here and a little red thing here. It kind of works. It's still so muted down here. The problem is like it moves the focus down a little bit. This is still very bright. So compositionally, we've got a little bit of a challenge, but I think maybe the way to do that as well would be desaturate this red a little more. This is still pretty bright. If you took that down a little, it'd probably draw the attention away because all the rest of this is quite desaturated, right? Like your purple is weak, your flesh tone is weak, all these things. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean they're not intense versions of the color. Okay, so looking here, I think the one thing I'm not sure about is this color change of the orange to the white. That's what really, like, I don't know what this is meant to be out here. If this is meant to be like a pox or something like that. It just transitions rather harshly and strangely. I feel as though this should probably go from, like, if that's what it's meant to be, some kind of infection, then I would take it into more of a yellow spectrum. Keep it more organic. Going straight to the white makes it look like you're kind of trying to go for heat, and it's kind of harsh. The purple on the back of the skin here, like you've got some nice tones in the skin, so that doesn't bother me. What I think I'd like to see a little more of, though, is some smoothing in between our darkest tones and our mid tones. Like right here, you can see how this just goes like dark, and then there's this hard line, and then we come out here. So what we probably need is some more glazing to kind of smooth this out. I can see where we did a little bit in here, and that's good. It's a little better down here. It's not quite as harsh. But, you know, take a little bit of these two colors, mix them together, and then give us some glazes along the middle here, I think is the right answer. So overall, the biggest challenges for me are probably the orange to white. I think, honestly, they're just distracting. If you had kept the carapace a dark universal color all the way around, I think you'd have a stronger piece. Because it'd be counterbalanced by the weird flesh, I think, appropriately. Heck of a weird monster you made there, though.
Yeah, that's okay. A lot of things coming together, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the thing, right? Like literally like from the original like John Carpenter movie. Mm-hmm. Where like this was a human guy and then this thing went and exploded out, which is, you know, scary.
Yeah, the thing that makes it creepy, extra creepy, is the fact that he's kept human arms in there too. Like totally.
Yeah. Sure. Well, if you've ever seen The Thing, boy, is that movie will scar you for life. So now let's turn to a different kind of Nurgle. Actually, my favorite kind of Nurgle, which is these Death Guard Marines, because they have very little grossness to them. So they're mostly just dudes in armor with high amounts of weathering, which I enjoy. Okay, so let's talk about compositionally on this thing. I said that was his main questions here. What works, what doesn't? Okay, so I'll flip around to here because I feel like we can all learn a pretty strong lesson right here. I'd like everybody, our viewers, to look at this guy, but don't look at him directly. Relax your eyes. Don't focus on anything. Just let your eyes drift. What color do you still see? I would argue you still see pink, because this pink is so strong, and it doesn't need to be. Like, this pink should have been desaturated down to have lots of like whites and light purples and stuff in the same way as this flesh. Now, it shouldn't be made of the exact same material, although it could be. I don't see any reason why this dude wouldn't wear a flesh tabard. It even has the same sort of rips and tears in it as a lot of the skin. But that being said, it doesn't have to be. If you had just went for a more neutral tone, this is way too bright of a pure pink or magenta or whatever you want to say to be counteracted by this weak mint green, this weak desaturated purple white, and so on. You have no other strong colors. That is to say, until we spin around to here and we have this blue. Same story here. Like, so, you know, you asked for feedback on composition. Okay. Composition wise, the steel, the bronze, the green armor all look great. I like the little bits of red and orange popping out through here, and the eyes, and this tube down here. They're so minimal. I think they're well balanced, and they're kind of scattered. Like, you see how you have little hits of it everywhere? Here's the little hit. Here's a little hit. Here's a little hit. Here, right? It just kind of keeps my eye darting around at all that. That's good. I like that. You could put a little more on the chest here too, by the way, if you really wanted to push that. But it's good. The blue and the pink are way too bright. Like, we went from this muted, desaturated scheme into like new retro synthwave colors. Too much. This needs to be way down, and this should be like the same. These should be like the same purple fleshy tone as the rest of this. I feel like you wanted to make the this feels like a case of, well, these tentacles are somewhat different than the rest of this flesh, hence I need to paint them different. No, you don't. You should have just made them the same color. Like, if this was this pink white flesh tone, they would be right in line. Okay. And by the way, you still have things standing out. Like, this guy has a lot of interesting colors going on, even if you desaturate this down. It's not like this guy isn't visually interesting. The only other thing I would say is with this big giant mace weapon thing he has, I would darken this leather out. You have two very similar-ish colors, and these are two very different materials, and that one is leather and one is, I don't know, wood, I assume. So make sure you want one of these to be quite different from the other, just compositionally speaking. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. Overall, your rust up here and this kind of stuff, this all looks good. We just need to smooth it out. I really like this green armor, by the way. I think that's really a standout. You have a really nice color here. I appreciate your choice of using silver instead of gold or copper or something. I think that works good or works well. You may want to think about a little rust in that silver, but that's fine, like you've got here. And I would work a little more brown tones into this either way, just because it should be a little dirtier than the clean steel you've got. But overall, I like that. I like the green. I like the steel.
Yeah, I think that rust is coming a little bit hot on the flail.
Right. If it wasn't for if it had brown, it would feel less strange. Right. Yeah. Like it's strange that we're going straight from steel into orange.
Yeah. So my suggestion for that is you could hit it with some kind of brownish or sepia wash and ink, and that'll dull out that steel and bring it more close.
Yep. Exactly. Just literally a wash over it and you should be fine.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good stuff, man. Okay. Next, over to Fulcrum with Grand Admiral Thrawn.
Mm-hmm. As a guy who used to be a Star Wars fan, I'm not up to speed with new Star Wars characters. But
he's a very old Star Wars character. He's from the Timothy Zahn novels. He was an EU character. He did get pulled forward.
All right. Well, let's get a closer look at this gentleman then, in all of his blueness.
Yeah, he's very blue.
And his whiteness.
Very crisp.
So that's where I want to begin, actually. I want to begin on complimenting Fulcrum on the challenges that we all have of mastering the white and getting that to come in smoothly, first of all, not chalky, and still having some kind of motion within it. So he's done that very subtly. There's a few spaces where you can see the folds in the cloth without it being a chalky hard line, and him doing that smooth transition is really wonderful. The creases behind his knees is where that's most prominent. His care and attention to put those piping lines on the coat itself is also very good, and you still get some definition of folds here and there. And he's done it in just a soft gray to make that happen. So I think that's complimentary, and I want to give him good props for that. The face too, and all the blue that he's done is also a very smooth application of paint. But what I want to move to as an offering here is that I think you could perhaps incorporate a little bit more life and emotion in this guy's face if you're willing to move a little bit into the violet range on this thing. Underneath the cheekbones and framing the face, I see that you've got a little bit of it around the eyes, and maybe that's just on this small picture, maybe just by virtue of the fact that you've painted the eyes in a red spectrum, that kind of radiates out and gives that illusion. But I can see that you've done a little bit of violet on the lips of this man. But I think that would be a worthy additive to shape the hands a little bit better in the knuckles, and especially underneath the cheekbones and the sallows of his cheeks. I think that you can work in and glaze in a little bit of violet in there, and it'll shape the face a little bit better. And the other thing that I thought I might mention is you have a couple of hot spots of those shoulder pauldrons being in the yellow gold. And when we talk about triangulation and composition, the other place that I think that you could pull that together so I'm not drawn back to those shoulder pauldrons all the time is that belt buckle. And I don't know if this is canon. Maybe you can't do that with Star Wars figures because that's how it is and you're emulating the costume design. But if you are willing to take a little bit of venture of your own artistic freedoms, I think that would be the way to polish this guy off. So yeah, there's my recommendations.
Nice. Yeah, I have no answer on that part. I know who he is. I don't know anything about his costume, but he's a cool fig. Like you said, that one of the crispest applications of white I've seen in a long time. So he definitely nailed that.
Not crispiest.
No. St. Crispin's Day. All right. So next up, we've got TD McDonald. Said his first guys after a 5-year hiatus. Okay, great.
Oh,
he's working on
back.
yeah, indeed. Working on his Drukhari for Kill Team. I have these same dudes for a Kill Team. How about that? Feedback on anything would be appreciated, but comments on color composition would be great. Well, all right. Let's talk about composition. I do like composition feedback. All right. So we're just going to scan through a little bit here so I can get to this picture. Okay. So here I'm going to give the same piece of advice I just did before, which is when we pull the relax our eyes and look at them trick, what do we see? And I would argue that in this case, what we see is absolutely that bright yellow to orange transition of their various like weapons and glaives and things like this. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, but it is very extreme. Now, in my mind, the best guy here, I think, is actually this dude in the back left. This guy right here. I like him the best because he has the effect. There's a little bit of yellow in there, but it's quite muted. And with him, my eyes are quite relaxed. The other highlights and like the green in the eyes and the edge highlights and stuff are still strong enough to balance it out and to help me. Like I can actually see still the majority of piece. That orange doesn't win out completely. Okay. So my advice would be to take some of that orange and push back that yellow some more. You don't need to get rid of it completely. It's a perfectly fine counterbalance to this. Like the scheme itself compositionally is fine, but yellow is the most it has the highest luminosity. I don't know. It's the brightest of all the colors. Okay. And so as a result of that, you have to be very careful when you employ it, because it's going to have an outsized weight in your composition. Okay. Now, look at Let's Lynn. Now we've talked kind of overall about that. By the way, the witches don't have this problem as much when we look at them because they have much less of that bright color going on. Here, these people feel much more in balance. Everything is in a nice shade. You've got, again, this nice synthwave color scheme, which I fully support in these pinks and blues, a little bit of this sort of turquoise. So you're right in my wheelhouse here. I like these guys quite a bit. Now, when we're talking about like general painting advice, let me find one that I think is probably a good one to give feedback on. Let's go for that other. Yeah, we can talk on this one. Okay. So overall, I like what you're doing here. We've got some nice stuff going on. My challenge to you would be on a few things. So that would be mainly on things like getting some more contrast into the black and into the purple. So like on this shoulder, we have some general flatness here, like where this is mostly the same tone down in here. Here we've got some nice edge highlighting on the knee. But I think you could take that a little farther. We could pull this down into more shadow. We could pop this edge into a little more light. The black, though, is where it really stands out. I would love to see, you've got some wonderful richness and tonal variation in the pink of the hair. I think that looks great. I'd love to see the same thing happen here in the black of their sort of leather outfits. Looking at the Calabites or Cabalites or however you say this, these guys, I think what we could do with here is popping out a little bit of the edges a little more on some of these plates and smoothing some of the ones that we have edged. So what I mean by that is you look here, we don't have like edges where I would expect them as strongly. Like, excuse me, here on the shoulder, here on this part, like this is way sticking out. So if anything's going to catch light, it would be this, right? And here where we do have it going up bright enough, we want to be careful. We either thin the line down, way down, or we smooth this out. So we need to smooth our transitions here a little bit. We have the same problem with flat black here. All our black stuff is just flat, black. I do want to compliment you, though, because I noticed one of the things you're doing throughout, which I loved. Let me go back to this girl. Let's take a look over here. Is we're working some nice shades into our metallics and, you know, sort of creating these nice effects. So I very much enjoy that. Keep that up. I would say take this even farther. Pop a little more silver over here on like this side, on this edge here to counteract that, because what you've shown me is that the light is coming down here, so it would gather along this edge, right? But yeah, overall, I love the tattoos. Those look real. Well, I shouldn't say tattoos. I'm sorry. I love the war paint. That's really what it is. That's what you've portrayed to me here. If you meant for this to be tattoos, these are not tattoos, but you did do great war paint. So as long as that's what you're aiming at, success. The reason I say they're not tattoos is they're not thin enough, they're not sharp enough, they're not dark enough, and they're not under the skin enough. So those are things. I have a video on tattoos. If you want to go back and look at that, you'll see what I mean. But this is great war paint. So assuming that's what you intended, you did do great on that. But yeah, overall, these are really cool. I like, beyond that, your color scheme, I like it. Like I said, knock back this yellow some. Give me a more orange to red tone like you have on this guy back here. And I think you got a winner of a scheme on your hands. The leader guy here, I particularly like, but again, these edge highlights, we need to thin them out. So how do we thin these? We take some of our original blue and we push our brush up real slow, real slow, real slow. And we just chew off that edge highlight until we get it right back there. That's all you got to do.
He has some very cool bases on those too. I'm intrigued by them.
Oh yeah, yeah. These are like I think these are like one of the like Eldari like bases I think you can get from somebody. I think they're pretty cool with the gems and stuff embedded. I think you can get these from you have to tell us who these are from. I'm trying to remember. I think I saw these, or at least something like these.
Maybe
Yeah, I
the
really dig 'em.
maybe the micro arts people.
Yeah, something like that. Like it's Secret Weapon or Micro Arts or somebody, but I can't remember who it is. But I dig them. They look really cool and good treatment of the gems on the bases too. I like how he used those to balance the color out. I didn't mention that, but thank you. That was actually a really great choice to add some more color and life down to those bases. So I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah. Hey, look, the Wisconsin gnome hunt has ended.
Uh-oh.
What is up?
The stone monk is in the house.
There you go. All right. Well, you'll get a pick in the next round. We thought maybe the gnomes had come to get you, or somebody thought you were a gnome. It's hard to say. But at any rate, rats.
Yeah, we're going to talk about flashy rats. So I am a Skaven fan. It is true. And what I especially enjoy about this is the color composition of how green and purple works together. It's surprising how much I like it, actually. So I think that's a good compliment. And in fact, when I was first glancing at this thing, it's obviously the green that I saw first because that's everywhere. But the second thing that I saw was that sort of plum purple, and I really like it. With the other stuff that you have in neutrals, so by doing the rat fur in brown and having a bit pieces of wood and copper on here, it kind of balances that out a little bit so that it's not all pastel-y colors coming at you. But where I want to offer up some critique and some offerings of improvement is predominantly when we're talking about the green. So in all the elements of green here, we have hoses, we have globes, we have sort of window panel bubbles on the side of some of these cisterns. We have smoke, and then we have cloth. All of these things in a good hot scorpion green. But here's the thing that I would offer you. We need to somehow differentiate between what these substances are. So I want to offer a couple things about how you can make a distinction between them all. So starting with the hoses and the globes and the contents of the cisterns, I think that's fine. You keep that at that super bright at you kind of a hot yellowy green. That's fine. I think where we need to distinguish is between the cloth, I think should be much more muted. And what I mean by that is, although the greater surface area of that is a darker green, you're still coming to the same kind of level of highlights on the edges of that green. So if you look at the cowling on this guy right front and center, for example, it's the same kind of hot yellowy green as it is on the hoses and as it is on the smoke that's pluming away. So I think that you just stop a little bit shorter on that. If you're going to touch it with that kind of yellowy green, then it has to be on a very, very small surface of it, you know, just the absolute last highlight rather than spreading it out over a bigger surface. You can spin through a couple other snapshots as we go here, Vince, if you like, so people can see some other pics that he's taken. And then the next place that I want to talk about is this plumes of smoke. And I think that the reason I want you to do that a little bit differently is because we want to differentiate between the substance of these things. So we have a hard, we have a soft, and we have a smoke. My recommendation in going into the smoke is that you mix in a little bit of blue-gray with it, actually. And you could get into your plumes of smoke as it tendrils away with a little bit of blue-green, and that's how it would turn out. Even if you do a little bit of glazing over it with that sort of bluish gray, as it is right now, you don't have to repaint or overlay it with opaque paint. But I think that'll change the texture of it. It'll sell the idea that it's a smoky substance, and it'll soften it up a whole lot more than those other hard substances like you've got in there. So that is my predominant thing about changing this up and giving it even more visual interest, because it certainly does draw you straight in, David, with the hotness of this green, and it makes you want to look at these models. But sometimes it can be a bit stinging when that intensity of green is in too many places and you're trying to distinguish between what surface is what. So predominantly, that's what I have to offer about that. One other thing to maybe offer is, I feel like the metals of Skaven should be a whole lot dirtier. So get out some verdigris and get at this copper with some verdigris stuff and mess that up. You can even mix your own if you've got a turquoise paint and you want to put in a little bit of glazed medium with that and really water it down. You don't have to necessarily go out and buy a specific verdigris. And then even if you want to wash that over onto the, well, maybe on the silver, I think maybe you go into some brown or some greenish brown. Citadel does a couple of those things like a Athonian camo shade. Of course, their Agrex Earth shade will dull that down a lot. But I think that deserves to be mucked up a little bit for the scavenness of it all. Yeah, and I want to compliment you on basing. That's interesting stuff. You got a little bit of the green glow coming down off of your sources there, very subtly onto those gray stones. So I appreciate that attention to detail too. Don't think that went unnoticed. But yeah, fun group of guys. I hope they do bomb many other things before they bomb themselves.
Yeah.
In these games that you play.
I'm just impressed that he managed to actually keep these as poison wind globadiers instead of what I did, which was turning these guys into like just stacks of acolytes. But hey, good on you. All right. Well, since we have Mr. Stone Monk back in the house,
lay it on me.
There is only one thing that we could have him review, as it is a gorgeous piece of conversion mastery playing with death imagery, which is something that I think our Mr. Stone Monk needs to look at. Ooh. So I'm just queuing up some pieces here. So if you would like to take Tristan Gray's finished Amhotep, the Golden Vulture of Vengeance, High King of the Carrion Isles, Emperor of the Desert Winds. I have a feeling that's near and dear to your heart.
Oh,
and then,
man. Yeah.
Kieran, if you would take our Sylvaneth Tree Bros here. And I thought we'd all together look at Andrew Wade's Spicy Dealings, and then I'll take this other Nurgle piece because I'd really like to talk about it. I know.
What?
I know.
You're rolling on Nurgle this week.
I am. I'm in the zone. I'm in the Nurgle zone.
You're throwing the equilibrium off.
All right. Well, let's start out here with Tristan's Passion Project.
All right. So, you know, as some of us death players, we and some of there's kind of this weird conversion because there's not a lot of new death stuff before the Night Haunt. Yet death has such a place in people's heart, and then that kind of convergence of Tomb Kings also being you know, a dead army in the system, and so people finding ways to convert and kit bash and that sort of thing. And Tristan's done a fantastic job here of imagining a Tomb King on Chariot with this carrion type of bird, taking the pieces you can see, obviously the Sky Cutter Chariot. You've got the Sky Cutter Hawk with a Keeper of Secrets head as a vulturous head. That emulates the carrion. Is that what they're called? The carrion, the Tomb King.
Yeah, carrions. Yep,
yeah, that's right.
And you know, just giving us this giant, you know, Tomb King flavored bird pulling this chariot that definitely suits the aesthetic of the Tomb Kings as well. And so there's just a lot of cool things that converge here from the idea to the bits and pieces that, you know, the ribbon wrappings and cloth around the wings like the carrion have in the Tomb King stuff to the I think those are from on the bird's back, those kind of shell pieces from one of
those are from the snake.
Yeah. So being able to kind of incorporate those in order to make it clear that the iconography is present, etc. So there's just a lot of really cool just culmination of things. And when any good kit bash or conversion, you want to have, in my opinion, you want to pull from the new and from the old, and then when they fit together and come together like Tristan has put these together, they really just sell the piece and make it feel like you know, it lives and breathes in the space. Tristan's done a great job of highlighting feathers, of giving us differentiation in those feathers. Giving us differentiation throughout the bird, from, you know, the reds in the kind of exposed wounds face to the blue ribbons, the blacks and the browns, and then the whites on the carapace. And then we get into some nice royal purples chariots, wings, etc. And then we get to contrast that with the sandy, earth, the kind of greenish look of the ruins, etc. So in that regard, there's a lot going on, but it's real easy to move your eye around to find what you're looking at, etc. It does feel like in those cases where we're often looking to limit palette, etc. He's got enough places on here to explore palette. For instance, the purple on the wings of the chariot in and of themselves kind of balance out. The blues of the wrappings kind of do similar, where there's some on each wing and then in the middle, and then back on the Tomb King. The reds back on the Tomb King and then on the face of the carrion. And the greens, can we see a picture? I'm assuming that the greens from the ruins are also up on some of the greens in the Tomb King's his heraldry or such, maybe like the skulls and that sort of stuff. So all these colors kind of bounce around. They're found in different places. The purple is also an interesting combination of the red and blue that's found in the iconography, etc. So that there's a lot of cool things there. The thing I think could have or something I would highlight, because the red of the carrion bird is so prominent, there's not another spot where there's that much red in one place. I might have looked to find, maybe that's the one color where I would maybe look to balance further, either on the Tomb King himself, maybe instead of like a white staff, that he has a red staff, or something in his hood or his face, that would make that red, or perhaps that's instead of purple on the wings of the chariot, that they go to a red. But I think that could overpower it too. But just looking for maybe another couple locations where the red is more prominent, and not just in the kind of dags, the Tomb King dags that are around there, on the iconography, etc. Other than that, I think there's just great highlighting. There's good examples of looks like some really controlled dry brushing on those wings, etc. I think the golds on the chariot could probably go darker with some more washes or that sort of thing, but you've got good highlights on those. And I think the only other thing I might say is to add some more mood to the piece, is where you've got your kind of the black wings, the black feathers. I don't know if they're, if that starts with black and is dry brushed up, then maybe it would just be a Nuln Oil wash down near the brown feathers, to kind of darken it more towards the brown feathers and towards the center of the bird, towards the body of the bird. There's some things you could do to kind of create some variation in color between the ends and or different parts. Sometimes for me, it's not always just rhyme or reason, like that it's realistic, but again, kind of your dry brushing on those feathers is consistent across the board. If there's some places where that dry brushing was dulled down a little bit and brighter towards the tips, that would create some visual interest as well. But at that point, I'm just kind of looking for some tips. I just really like the conversion. It sells me. The what you've put together, how you've put it together, sells me, and I think the whole Tomb King community has really enjoyed watching this conversion come together. So nice work. What do you got to say, Vince, Mr. Tomb King player also?
Yeah, I love it. It's great. I mean, I agree with all the points. There's some finer points of painting that you covered there. I agree with. I feel like we could have maybe a little more of the green up above or down below. Like we got a little bit too much contrast there between the green and the purple as far as how they're sectioned.
Yeah.
But, actual conversion wise, I mean, let's face it. Love it.
Yep.
Yeah, for me, it's the purple. I want to see a little bit more, actually. And what I thought of is perhaps on the columns structure is where you could work that in a touch.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah. Have that like purple there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All
That's
right,
great.
but yeah, very very good stuff. You can tell a lot of love, and like 18 kits went into that. So much respect. All right, let's talk about some Kurnoth hunters. Got some tree boys.
Okay, queuing it up. So once again, I get to double dip in the purple and green zone. Love it. The other thing working its way in here, of course, is that sort of very sort of violet red that he's got on the branches. At least that's how it reads. I'm sure he's trying to stay into the brown zone, but it maybe got a little bit red. So let's start on the good side. A very organic sort of green. Like this feels, it's more in the sort of khaki neighborhood where you've done your highlighting for it. And it feels natural. It feels like vegetation. When we look at a couple of the individual guys, you can see that he has paid a little bit of attention to shadows in some ways, because the lower part of the model has less bright pickups on it when he goes through his highlighting progressions. So down on the feet, if you flip to the next frame, it has an individual model. We can see what I mean a little bit better here. So that's not just shadowing that's appearing down there. It's actually that he's doing less highlighting. So on the face is still where your eye wants to come to, and the torso. And then the other place where he goes high in green is, of course, on the, I want to call it plumage, but I guess it's, branches on the crown of his head. And then his brightest spots are the leaves themselves. The other thing that I really like to compliment him on is getting some sharp interest in those purple blades. He actually has painted it so that there's such good movement in it. And I think that works really well for me. A couple of other things that I think I want to look to improvement, though, is that where you've gone with the other branches that, as I said at the outset, feel red or orange, I think that's the part that comes in a little bit hot, and it sometimes detracts away from the rest of it. I think if you left that more neutral, you can still give it a little bit more reddish color than what you did on the bone staff, for example, or a different brown than what you got on the logs that they're standing on. But I think it's gone just a little too far to there to detract from the other good work that you've done on the greens. So if you were to do more of these things, I guess that's my recommendation, is toning that down to a little bit. Let's get another frame to the next one, and see what else we can see here. Those mushrooms you can leave red, though, I think, if you want to have still a little bit of touch into there. And if you're willing to, models of this size, I really appreciate how you've used those Citadel woods to give you some kind of extra stance and presence on the bases here. But grow some more vegetation around that. If you want to take some more of these tufts or even some static grass and that kind of thing and put it tighter onto the log, I think that would really pay off to bring the bases to a nice place. And it would also give you an opportunity to have some of that bright green that you've got on the leaf tips down here on the base as well, for a little bit of balancing top to bottom. Those are my big thoughts about this, aside from just finishing up by saying really clean painting on those staves, especially how you've really sharply done all those sigils, and you framed all the sigils that are part of the carapace, the shoulder pads, and the faces. Tremendous work on that, Thomas, and I think that makes for a pretty winning look. Full compliments for that. Okay, and there we go. So I have to say about that.
Yeah, it's a great color scheme that you combine some things I really like in a way that I personally wouldn't have thought to combine them. It's pretty great.
Yeah, believe it.
Okay. Well, I mean, like just his tonal choice was really interesting there, right? With the red having the yellow colors in it, and the green having the yellow colors in it, and then using the pretty violet like he did, right? So it sort of balanced it out rather nicely. It was a really interesting compositional choice overall. Speaking of popping yellows, let's all just take a look at.
I'm gonna step away just for a minute.
Sure. We can all take a look at this together while Kieran steps away for a moment. And let's all just. I have no feedback for this. I can try. I'll try, Andrew, for you. Okay, because I know feedback is always valued. But like, it's glorious. It's really glorious. Okay, so this is.
I'll quickly say similar colors to the trees.
Sure.
But used in some different ways and a lot of, I guess, a lot more travel from the different ends of the, there's all the purples, all the greens,
Yes. So we've got so many wonderful things going on here. He had mentioned that he had taken a texture class with Kirill, which obviously worked out very well for him, because we have here some wonderful texturing in the rope and the leather and the hair and the lips and the I don't know what this is, hat, I guess, his little
cap,
jaunty cap. Yes. But I mean, I would really encourage everyone to look at this and to really look deeply, because the more you look, the more you will see, between the way that he's like this pigment dealer or whatever, where he's got these spices, right? And you can see how he's gotten some spice up on his jerkin because he's just carrying open spice, and some has gotten down here on the bottom. He's got these little crossed jalapeno swords, which I love. The lips, I particularly love how purple they are. I think, the one thing I noticed, and I'm sure this was an intentional choice, but I'd be interested, Andrew, as to why we didn't use a little bit of a purple tone as a counter into the yellow. Like you have this sort of deep orange scarlet being your recess color, which I like in the nose and the under the eyes and in the ears and stuff like that. But I think maybe drawing a little bit of the purple in a contrast, like having it up here at the sort of 1/4 highlight mark of the nose, having it here at the upper part of the lip. And I'm thinking of this in like a super light glaze. But as just these light touches of purple influencing here, I think could have been interesting. I feel like you do have some of it down here where you've gotten into sort of a green. It feels almost more like a purplish spectrum in your deep shadows here on the back of the bust. But I feel like I could have seen some more up here where we fell into that. Maybe here on the bottom of the jaw. Maybe here in the recess of the ear. It just feels like that color scheme would have given us that bit of kick of extra life. I'm not sure. I think that's probably my one piece of feedback. It kind of struck me. His teeth are, I guess here's the second one. His teeth are really clean. Now, I'm sure the spice dealer has clearly an excellent dental care policy. So that's fine. I just feel like maybe I would have liked to see a little, you went with the raw white and gray white color of the teeth to contrast against the yellow skin, which I get. You didn't want to work brown or yellows into the teeth, which makes perfect sense. That being said, I would have loved to see you then pick a contrasting tone and work it in there instead, because teeth can have all sorts of colors in them. It looks like you got a little bit of gray or purple in here. I would have loved to see you take maybe almost a little super light green shadow tone into these teeth. Not overtly, not anything strong, not overwhelming. I'm talking about almost like a deep green, like a hunter green or a green brown or something like that, extremely lightly. Barring that, it would have been a neat place to hide a little bit of extra crimson. Barring that, we could have went for texture. We could have went for some like black spots or stippling of some tooth decay, just like tiny spots where he hasn't taken care of his teeth, and a texture stipple pattern to kind of show some more interesting texture there, because teeth have an interesting texture to them. So I feel like that was another texturing opportunity. But overall, the leather execution here is amazing. Skin execution is amazing. The color composition is amazing. I love so much of this. It is a glorious piece, my friend.
100%. I've got 0. Got nothing on this.
Not even touching this one. No, if
Nope.
it's fair enough. It's great, man. Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
All right. Radek, long time no see. And he says, so here we've got, which is this Typhus? Is that who it is? I think maybe. I don't know.
Yep.
And he says he stole the idea for his base from me. Nonsense. I love this base. Yes, I did a similar base on my like Death Guard Lord, and yeah, man, it's awesome, isn't it? It's super fun. Making these big rusty pipe bases with like, junk coming out the front. All right, so let's take a look at this guy. Obviously, this dude's very fun. He's got a lot of little bugs and flies and stuff. Again, these Nurgle Death Guard guys are like the Nurgle that I don't mind because they're all in armor. They have very few like exposed rotting parts. So my initial impression is that here I feel like the challenge is a little bit the opposite. We need a little more pop across the armor. So my challenge here is, I think your elements like your smoke look really good. I think these Nurglings and their little bug dudes, all these look right. You desaturated all these colors down really nicely so they don't steal focus. And we can swing around here like we see. So I mentioned earlier on the desaturated pink, you see how much other tones there are in here. It's preventing this from becoming too overwhelming, which I appreciate. That being said, I think the armor itself is a little flat. Like when I look at the armor from a distance, it just kind of has this universal green tone. So I'd love to see you push the shades and the highlights a little more. At the same time, I'd love to see you have maybe some darker rust or grime or grit or something. This could come in through the steel. This guy has a lot of steel. You also chose to do steel as your sort of secondary metal here, which I have no problem with. But again, maybe you've got some corrosion on the sort of copper pieces. A little bit of brown, maybe a little bit of orange rust in the steel would both suit this, obviously this figure quite apropos, given what this dude's all about. So narratively, it's certainly aligned. But it would also then add some more color in interesting ways. And then same down here on the base, right? When we get to the base itself, we kind of, again, have this problem where we got some nice green tones in your muddy, dirty earth. But like these old pipes have no orange, no red, no other color in them. They're very neutral. And so I think what I'd like to see there is a little bit of that contrasting pop color to really bring that out. It wouldn't require a lot. We just need something on the edges, on the metals, something to make that all stand out and break up that green a little more. That's my thought on that. Overall, this guy's good. You executed very well on him. Your green looks smooth. Your weathering looks nice. Yeah, he's great. And I dig the base. You nailed it there. Like overall, like building that thing wise, it's wonderful. All right.
I'm glad you like this this gooey style of Nurgle because you're coming around after.
Well, like I said, as long as we don't have, I just can't handle the rotten like body stuff. You know what I mean? That's what I can't do. Like the dudes who I'm sure are absolutely grotesque underneath, but have done the decency of locking themselves in armor. I'm okay with. All right. So I'll just keep rolling here. I'll take Paul Stocky's shark here, if that's all right. If Kieran, you want to handle Skeleton Flower's Phantasm for his Grimkin Pumpkin, and Eric, if you'd like to handle this sweet Centaur skeletons, Centaurton.
I would.
Skeletar. All right. So, Mr. Sharky, his first 75 millimeter mini, he says, and he says he wants to concentrate on bigger models from now on. Yeah. Once you paint your first like 54 or even better 75 millimeter mini, it becomes addicting. 75 is my favorite size to work in. You get to do so much more detail than you normally would do otherwise. Okay. So let's take a look at this guy. All right. So Mr. Sharky, high level, I like a lot of what's going on here. The colors are really nice. I like the little bit of pink here we've worked into the lips And on the octopus, if we're going to work this pink into the lips, which I'm okay with, let's put that somewhere else too. Let's say this guy's humanoid. Sharks don't normally have arms, so we get to decide here, right? I don't know if I'm breaking new ground here on my anatomical studies, but sharks don't normally have arms. I know.
I think that's what I learned in school too.
Yeah. So we could work some of that.
I think it can be debated.
Sure. We could work some of that purple into maybe an elbow or maybe a knuckle or around the edge of the nails, right? Or maybe around a vein, say, that's popped way out here and here, right? Because I assume this is sort of blood close to the surface or something like that. Like this guy he's cold-blooded probably, but he's still got blood. The actual skin tone and stuff like that looks really nice. I like the working of the white to the blue to the dark. Like overall, that's gorgeous, just gorgeous. So I love everything about that. The transitions there, the spots. I would have loved to see some more spots. You do a little bit of the spotting here, which looks great. You could take that even farther, frankly. Bring a little more down, take a little more up. But I mean, it doesn't have to be. It's just I dig it. I dig it like crazy. The little barrel and these pants, that'll looks nice. So overall, like I like all the color and stuff like that. No problem. Here are a couple small things that jump out at me. One, we've got this big old gap here. Definitely want to make sure we putty those up in the future. Like that could be fixed. Or is that a string?
What is that string?
Oh, that's a string. Never mind.
Necklace.
I guess. Yeah. I'm sorry. That was just a delusion. That was that is a hell of an optical illusion. Ignore what I just said.
Wake up.
I am very sorry.
Wake up.
No, that's crazy. Doesn't that look like it though? Like the way it created that shadow and light? Huh. How about that? Okay. Then never mind. Ignore that. Let's talk about, then I'll give you my other things here, which is this. At 75 millimeter, we need texture, more texture. You've already started exploring that. That's good. Keep pushing it. What I mean by that is this cloth. You got some scratches. You got some dents and rents and things here. Take it farther. You can get into like hashes and cross hatches here to show some fibrous nature to that cloth. Push that. Here in the leather and stuff like that. Let's see. So you've got some scratch and dent. Take it farther. Show me more. Show me more at the edges where it's peeling, where it's cracking. Show me dark spots. Show me light spots. Show me where salt has etched into this thing. Like this dude's a pirate. He lives on the open seas. Things weather hard, exposed to this kind of atmosphere, right? Same with this down here. Same with his boots. Now let's spin around here to his back. You've got some nice scratches. Again, go farther. Look up shark skin and look at how rent and dent and tiny, look at the tiny micro scratches in shark skin, right? Like that hard gray skin that they have really gets scratched up easy as they work their way around the ocean. So show me some of that texture in there. And I think that's the way you take this up to the next level, is by when you get to this size, you can like really build your detail out. You kind of need to just sell every single texture and take it to its absolute limit. Okay. Now, that being said, overall, this looks really, really good. I like the golds. I like the things in the gun. If this is an attempt to drill out a barrel, we can probably do more. It's a big barrel. We can drill this out. You thought you were going to get by that? You thought that you're going to get this undrilled barrel out to by me? No. Drill them barrels. He's got a big musket. Let's run something down there. But I like him. Your colors are spot on. Your skin looks amazing. The eyes look wonderful. All these colors are great. One small note on his base: the sand to water transition looks good, with one exception. Why is this sand the same color as this sand? What I mean by that is you have water that's coming up into sand. You look at the edge of a beach, water flows in, it flows out. What color is the sand that the water just touched? It's darker because it's wet. So make this water wet. Make this sand wet, right? Show me a wet line here where the water is flowed in and then come back out. It's amazing how much a little touch like that will convince people they're looking at real sand. Sand does not run uniform to the beach, right? To the water. And then maybe something else here in the water would be good. Like it'd be great if you had a little floating half bottle in the water, little message in a bottle, police style, or something. Just something else to spice that up. Little tiny detail, maybe a tiny piece of driftwood could also be good. Anything like that. Just a little itty bitty thing there to just kind of give me some more visual interest down here in this area. It's kind of open. But the water itself looks really good. The sand looks really good. We just need to mend the two together and put them into the same world. Okay.
I vote for some kind of purple flotation device.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that'd be good too. Yeah. You could have a little purple algae bloom floating down here, right? Yeah. Again, sure. Not hard at all. Like the ocean lines are so fascinating because they provide you the opportunity for almost any color, right? Like you can have greens and reds and purples and anything. Like it's an explosion of life where the land meets the earth. So like everything's on the table, right? Okay. Skeleton flower, pumpkin.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite guys, and this is a great subject for what I have famously dubbed as the skeleton flower style. So for those catching up to us for the first time and haven't seen one of this man's pieces, it's the striation buildup of color in such fine, tiny little strokes that builds color and makes transition over a short space that I really, really love about his work. And this is a great exemplifier of it when you look at the pumpkin itself. And it's so suited for the kind of texture that you actually really do see in a pumpkin. So that's the first attraction, of course. He also carries that over onto these little crystals, I guess, that are here on the sides and playing around in the dirt. And even the way that he does that, like even the way that he does his ground texture, which is just like a pile of stones or dirt or muck, he gives it the same kind of attention of all those striations. Look at the shield too; it's great. Here's the one thing that I feel doesn't mix with this though, is because your style is such an attractive thing and it's something you've leaned into. Maybe I'm over analyzing this because that's the expectation I've kind of learned to get from your style, Mr. Flower, if I may call you Mr. Flower, is the metallics seem to be done in a very different style. And I think that it is standoffish and makes me believe it's not part of the whole picture, because it feels as if it's done by a different artist. And so what I mean by that is there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way that you've done the rusting and made this look realistic, with the rusting around the rivets and, the capture of where you put the highlights, et cetera, et cetera. That's all in the grand scheme of things correct, but it's a style shift. And I think that's what makes it stand apart. It feels a little bit different. If you did the same time, just sort of similar hatching in short little lines, in similar directionality to your other stuff, I think that would feel a little more in line with this model. But I'm super pleased with it, just the same. That's just an observation that I don't know if anybody else feels, but that's my own feeling. I think anybody else, most people that would look at this would still say, yeah, that looks great, and the metal is correct. The other thing that I think I might say is, looking at the front end of the pumpkin a little bit, if we can flip back to look at that guy, or even the back end is fine. The volume and the shape of, and it might be the lighting because orange sometimes gets washed out, but I see that you have between the three pumpkins, you have some purple that you've incorporated in there to make sure that we see the definition a little bit better. I think down the the vertical lines, the depth of those kind of bulbs of the pumpkin gourd could use a little bit more defining. I think that could use a little bit more shade in there to catch some definition. in the pumpkin. But that's my only other critique about it is to get depth into that. Otherwise, a wonderful character piece again that you have managed to find, and I'm sure that you pleased Bethany Graham to a great deal by doing a pumpkin subject altogether. For those listening at home, Bethany's one of our great contributors of the PMP who religiously comments on most things that come up. So she is a wonderful part of our community.
100%, and a giant pumpkin fan, and I respect that.
Yes,
she loves the pumpkins. All right. So now we've got the what did I say? Skeletar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a He-Man copyright thing that we need to be careful about?
No, I said tar, not Tor.
Yeah.
Very completely different. Unrelated. I've never even heard of this Stargate thing you're talking about. I'm talking about the Fargate.
Right. An interesting fact. If I recall, turning skeleton horsemen into centaurs was, I think, my first conversion back in like 2014, 2015.
Wow, really?
And because what I was doing is the start of my undead army. It was for an escalation, and I was trying to make each unit be some other creature or race in the Warhammer world. However, there weren't any centaurs, so after I built them, I was not fulfilled by them living in the world. That being said, what I can already tell you from this, because I've done that, is that these are fiddly models that take a lot of mold scraping, so that in and of itself is fantastic, undertaking. He's cut and repositioned the back legs to give it much more of a reach in its gait. And I did a little bit of that myself. And when you do that, there is quite a bit of movement and feel, because I also did that for my Wood Elf riders. So I've done a number of these horses in my undead army to convert them to just and it doesn't take much, but this centaur has some great motion and great movement that you wouldn't expect from the stock standard horses. And some of that is just picking the right two halves to put together to have that those bent front legs as well. Getting that torso in there is great. Using the old Tomb King, you definitely need to use those because they're a bigger, they're more substantial than the newer skeleton sculpts, and so it fits. It still is always interesting when you actually get to proportion a human body on a horse body that they're not the same size by any means. But
are you saying that normal centaurs are lying to us? Is that
I'm saying is that putting a regular sized person torso on a regular sized horse is pretty disproportionate. So I don't believe in them because of that fact. So
that's the thing. Yeah, sure.
But then you've gone and put horns on this guy, which is really cool, giving him a whole different appeal. It starts taking the aesthetic in a different direction, not just it kind of starts pushing any of that Tomb King's, the ideas of it being a Tomb King skeleton horse out of the mind, and then with that hook staff and the flail kind of does that further, some of those old kit weapons and stuff. So base looks cool with some rocks and foliage and some different textures and colors there. I suppose if I were to give you one more kind of tip to seal the deal, if you're doing another one of these or some more of these, is kind of do a bit of a tabard or something coming off the waist into the front to or some other kinds of leathering or straps or that sort of stuff where he might put those weapons when he wants to put them down. So maybe there's just some scabbards or something like that in the hanging off of the horse body or or wrapped around the horse rib cage, etc. So, and that can give you some more opportunities for some green stuff work, etc. So, coloring looks good. The bone work looks great. You could probably transition some of the. You kind of go down into a yellowish red in the horns or a brown in the horns. If I could see more of that tone throughout the rest of the skeleton, I think that would balance it out and make the horns feel like they're more part of the kind of that bone ecosystem, that they've been aged in the same place, etc. So maybe down towards the hips or down towards the ground or into the hooves, that you can get down into that darker color bone as well. The metals look a little shiny for this being an aged skeleton, so I would age those up with some rust, etc. And the stave that he's holding, the wood looks really bright and healthy and new, or even like stained, being that dark. When you so I would either I would gray it up and make it be kind of more kind of age or Rekarth Flesh Bane Blade colors to kind of just age it and age it differently than the bone into more of a gray, but definitely need some more age on there. But this guy looks great. Great job, with the conversion. It's a fiddly little conversion, and brings back the memories.
Brings back the good feels of the old days.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Let's see. Next up, we've got some nice little OSL dudes. We've got a big old Hive Tyrant. And then we've got Jacob brings us some fiery ghosty boys. So I'll take the OSL dudes. If Eric, you would like to take the Hive Tyrant, you've had some experience with some Tyrannid parts.
Yeah.
If Kieran, you'd like to take the flamey ghosty boys.
I'll do.
Okay. So this is a Sumer. I'm gonna guess that's how that's pronounced. And he's says that he's been watching stuff for about a year, and it's what made him start painting again, start after almost a 10-year stop. So that's great. And this is his first post, so welcome. And what was really funny here is he said as he was watching some videos of Darkest Dungeon, it reminded him of an old diorama he saw in White Dwarf when he was a kid. I am going to be willing to guess, given the color scheme he picked here, that the diorama he saw was of the Sisters of Sigmar, the Mordheim warband of Sisters of Sigmar, when they're rescuing one of their sisters. And that is a diorama by Victoria Lamb, who was probably a master of OSL long before anybody else was doing it to the level she was. And it's one of my favorite pieces ever.
Nice.
So there you go.
I vividly that one too.
Yeah, it was a landmark piece, right? I mean, just incredible.
If I may, sorry to interrupt one more time.
No, please.
He posted on Twitter as well and posed the question of how this kind of style of the OSL and the kind of
the sort of extreme nighttime lighting.
Yep, and kind of a limited color palette like this, how that would fare in a painting rubric at an event, and that sort of stuff. And obviously you are very versed in that sort of thing, so you may want to touch on that point as well.
Sure. Yeah, I did see that. So let me touch on the technicals of this particular piece first, and then we'll talk about that.
Sure.
So what I will say is that overall, I very much like what you've got going on here. It's obviously a bit tricky because we're doing like extreme environmental OSL here, right? Like it is nighttime. These guys have basically no ambient light other than a weak moonlight, and are being mostly completely lit by their torch. So given that that's the reality here, the base construction of the lighting is excellent. So when we flip these guys around and look at the back, you can really see how we've captured the moonlight in this shadow. So there's a great article on Massive Voodoo I would encourage everybody to read who's interested in this sort of thing, called All Cats Are Black at Night. Okay. And it's about how certain colors work in the absence of light because they don't all act the same. And like green is different than red when it's nighttime. That's the simplest way I can say it. Just because the nature that nighttime is actually like soft blue light. And so that's going to impact things differently. Speaking about this, like selling the illusion here of what's going on, it does. My only challenge is in some of these pieces, we need to bring a little more of the normal color back into it. So what we have here is a yellow torchish light source, right? So it's effectively an extremely warm light source. What it should be doing is largely creating warm versions of whatever color these guys really are, right? So here in this guy's skin, it's done it quite well. Like it's brought out a normal skin tone. Not surprising. We would expect to see more or less a yellow, warm skin tone. But like over here on this guy's book, it's too red. And like that's ultimately where we have the problem. We have a bit too much red in places that shouldn't be red. So for like this guy's skin, it should be the same thing. This should be bringing out on this side his normal-ish skin tone just warmed up, really adding the ochre, the sepia, the warm tones. Same with the hair, whatever hair he's got. Like it should look basically brown, but a very warm brown. Whatever else, and on and on and on, right? Like this is some kind of collar he's wearing, so assumingly there's steel here, so that should be basically gray but highly reflecting that metal. Same with this decapitated head, right? If this is like an old rotten head, we should see like weak yellow flesh where it's kind of gone to rot, so we've got green and gray mixing with that yellow. So my encouragement would be you've set excellent tones here, but like if this were to be the real light situation, one of the challenges we've got is these guys are kind of just lit by nothing. Like I assume these two are lit by his torch. That's basically what you're going for, which is fine. It's just they're farther away than say the top of this arm, right? Like this guy is clearly farther from this torch than this arm is from this torch. And yet he is more red and lit than this arm, right? So like if you're going to sell the illusion, this is a really tough illusion to sell because you've got to consider the lighting and the shadow. And I do want to compliment you that you built up shadows in good places because you can't strike a match without creating a shadow, and you did that. You have deep shadows here, deep shadows here, deep shadows here, where this light is coming down and creating not only the hot, but the cold dark. So I dig the living heck out of that, but I want to see more of that. Like, would this stick really be that dark down here? Because consider this yellow light is going to come down here, hit the ground, and then bounce up, right? It's going to cast this whole area on this side in a fairly soft, like it's going to be weaker, but this is very cold, too cold, right? We have reflected lights too. Like when we do OSL, we tend to think like, okay, here's the light source. Let me draw some straight lines out and what's it hit? And that's fine. But one of those things that line is hitting is the ground. And when it hits the ground, it's going to hit like this and travel back up at the same angle. And what's it find? The stick. Right. So we want to think about things like reflected light sources. We want to think about how things like metals and stuff like that work. Start bringing in more of the normal tones. Okay. So the blue side is easier for me to sell because in complete blue, cold light, like of night, it really will wash almost all the colors out of everything. And things will look, it'll almost become a value sketch, like a blue value sketch. That I believe. So the cold side's more believable to me than the warm side. Now, the topic of like this in a tournament. It's going to be challenging is my answer to you because it has to be set up in a very specific way. Like for this sort of overall ambient OSL, I'm sure someone would get it. I don't think you'd ever run into like a 3-color minimum thing. I saw the original question that was posed on Twitter was like, would this meet a 3-color minimum? I mean, Yes. there's so many more than 3 colors going on here. I don't know, right? Like just off the top of my head, I can see yellows and reds and purples and blues and blacks and like I can see 10 different colors here just at a glance. So I anybody who said it wasn't a 3 color minimum, I think has really wildly misinterpreted what that standard means. The biggest challenge you're going to have with this in a tournament setting is you have a very controlled lighting situation here where you took this photograph. A tournament is going to be in a building that's probably in a roughly bright, vaguely yellow overhead light, maybe fluorescence, so maybe drifting into the cold. In that case, it's going to be highly zenithal based because it's mostly overhead lighting in a big room. And there's going to be other board and ambient light sources around. So it's going to be tough to like sell the illusion in what is otherwise an extremely well lit, bright room, right? Like if you put these guys against like a super black background, as they basically are here, this is sort of gray, charcoal gray, but nonetheless, if you darkened out the background, it would suddenly feel like completely realistic. If you put them against a bright, normal daylight city scene, it would look weird as all get out, right? And that's because a lot of this is sold based on the ambient environment we can't see. So when that other environment doesn't match our expectations, it plays with our brain. So, would it be, I don't know if it would get the credit. Credit is a hard way to say it. I don't know how judges would treat it. It's so different than what people are used to seeing. You could easily run up against some challenges, right? With a rubric. But that being said, who cares? It's an awesome project. I love it. It's painting bravely. It's a great exploration of color and tone and a concept. And besides, it's a Mordheim Warband, so I don't think he's ever taken it to a tournament. But that being said, it's fantastic. I think you just need to work on extrapolating more how warm light interacts with color. Think about your base color. How does warm light interact with it? And paint to that in the middle. You've got cold light very well established, so play with warms. Look at, I think it was Stephen Johnson did it in the most recent Age of Sigmar Open Day. He took like either the silver or the gold for his Witch Hunter versus a vampire in a graveyard. And he very much used the ambient lighting of warm torch versus cold vampire. So go look at that and see how he treated the colors in that. I think that's a good example. It's up on the Golden Demon site. So look at the Age of Sigmar Open Day open category, maybe? No, dual category. That's what it was. There you go. Yep. But I love it. It's great stuff. Keep exploring, keep pushing yourself.
Rock on.
All right. Hive Flyrant.
Everything might be a little frozen for me at the moment. I'm not seeing anything.
Can you see it, Kieran? Is it coming up for you normally, or?
Yep, I got it here. Okay, well, let me talk about this guy then.
All right, you talk about this guy. We'll trade.
Sure. Okay. So, big giant model, lots to tackle here. And overall, we have a good mix of colors going on here between purples and pinks in the same spectrum. And I'm sure that Vince, you appreciate the fact that he's worked a little bit of teal in here in ways too, because that's your jam.
It is. Yeah. It is. They don't call me the tyrant of teal for no reason, my friend.
That's right. I've never called you anything else. Okay, so color selection feels fine to me. I think that's a good place to start. Let's get a headshot, a front-on view of this thing to begin with, if we can find that frame. What is that we got here? So here's something that I'm intrigued by, and I'm kind of going to try to see if I can get into your head a little bit, James, with your thoughts. When you're moving through that sort of it almost feels like a metallic colors that you're going through on all the carapace stuff, and ending up in purple through teal and down into that sort of greenish metallic. What that reads to me is, my immediate thought is the same way that I think of when metal gets overheated and it kind of gives that kind of a glow to it, and it moves through those kinds of colors. That's what I was thinking of here, and I don't know if that was your intention, but if it was, and I am in your brain, then spooky, and you won't sleep well tonight. But secondly, if I think that is a cool idea, and it's something you could probably lean into a little bit more. However, my general observation of that is that you have to try to do it with less banding of color. So we can't have an easy spot where one color stops and the other begins. There has to be a little bit of movement and overlap in that. We've talked about it a bunch in the past with respect to horns, especially, is what comes to mind. But if you've seen us ever talk about how to do that with horns, I think you can try to do the same thing with this, and use your color less opaquely, and start to do it with some glazing and a bit of more transition to it. Okay, so start at the same root and then just work your way through that kind of color, and maybe incorporate a little bit more yellow into that green as well. If you've got some glazes or some inks that you can get into, you can still get that sort of shine that you've attained here to make it look metallic, and I think that'll do well. Try it out maybe on the claws first, the claws and the spine tips that you got on the edge of the around the wings, and see how you like that. See if you can get that to, and I'm going to come back to the thought of not banding of color where one color stops and the next starts, but overlay them a little bit and have that a smoother transition, and see how you like that, because I think that you can lean into that and get that sort of hot metal idea, and it'll look good across this, because the base colors work fine together. The next thing that I would suggest that you do is this biggest surface area that you have to work with, of course, is those wing membranes. And being, at least the way that it reads in this photography, is all completely one color pink with only a bit of a subtle purple that goes into those folds on there. See if you can stretch out that purple a little bit more and get some more of that darkness into there to redefine those folds in the membrane. Let it settle in real close to the bone spines as well, where it can stay a little bit darker towards that on the top side. And then on the underside, in the middle of the membrane, where it's sort of bowing upwards on the underside, is where it should be a little bit more purplish. So see if you can work some more color into those things, and I think that you will define the wings a whole lot better and give us some more visual interest and get some contrast in there. Again, a lot of the touchstone things that we often talk about: contrast, visual interest, tonal variation, to use a Vinceism. All those things add value to a model, and when you're working with a big model, it just is in more demand to get that going on in there. So try out a couple of those things, see how you feel about it. Hopefully those couple of tips can work to improve upon a big, glorious piece.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for covering that.
Right on. Are you back with us again?
As far as I know.
All right. Well, let's see if you can see some ghosty boys. These are converted up to be his ghost riders, as a matter of fact. You might say they're ghost riders in the sky. You might.
Well, this is really cool. I really like the scheme that he's chosen with this flame effect in the ethereal portion. And what if you go to, let's start with the first image. If you go to the left, go to the next image, then to the right.
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
This one.
Yep. And you'll see here the first critique I'm going to have is in the flame effect. And it looks like maybe this has evolved as you've done it. That usually happens to me. The first time I try it, I get something I like. The second time, something a little bit more. And then the third, fourth time, I've kind of hit a stride. Of these three, I prefer the execution of this flame on the figure on the left. And here's why. One, the figure on the right has similar to what was it we were just talking about, is where there's banding, where your color transition, and you have some great blending throughout all three of these, but in this case, the where the transition is from white to yellow to orange to red to black is parallel from the top of the model to the bottom, regardless of how the ethereal effect is moving. And it comes off more like candy corn than it does like flame. So you want to break that up. And the model on the right does that very well, in that the whites don't stay in the same band. Sometimes that white and that yellow travels down further than other places, and then vice versa, that orange travels up into their space a little bit. So in flame, there's constantly transitioning and trading of that energy. And if each of those different spectrums of light here are a different type of energy, it's not a smooth transition, it's a violent transition. And so there's constantly trading and swapping those colors in those spaces. Now, rarely, but sometimes, do you get the red traveling up into the white, and so in this scenario, or up into the yellow, but sometimes you do. And so it's not bad to have those sorts of things. Now, the middle one has some of that, where you see some of that transition. Where I have some issue with this one in particular is that you go black, red, orange, yellow, white, yellow, orange. So the white is no longer the kind of that central heat source up by, or most intense source up by the model. It kind of just becomes color mixed in the middle, which is what I like better about the execution on the left, is that white becomes much more of a heat source. So that's what I would say, is if you have an opportunity to, or if you're doing some more of these, or if you have opportunity to go back and look at these, would make sure your spectrum is consistent, but that it's not banded, that you're trading in some random and violent ways between the colors, but you're generally making sure that there's always orange between the white and the red, or the yellow and the red, etc. But then the flip of that is that the rest of your models, if we go back, let's go to the right one more, if there is one. Yeah, this one works. The rest of the model, because your red and white and orange is so intense, the rest of the model just kind of sinks into, slinks away, or just is not doesn't stand out as much. And so a couple of things you can do to do that is by using instead of just going to black, which it does definitely contrast, but it doesn't necessarily complement, is to use blues and greens on the other part of the model. So the cloak, at the topmost portions of the cloak, could go into a green color or a blue color. The flails that they spin around could be a cold metal rather than a warm, kind of rusted metal. So you could go into, take a medium silver and wash it with some blues, or start with blues and then highlight it up with some lighter colors and do some different stuff there, so that in particular with this model, the cloak's not as important, but the faces of the model and those flails on the model are kind of these other key elements that you want to highlight. So giving them some space by, and here's the thing, the reason complementary colors work so well is that you don't need a lot of them to pop next to their complementary color. Like, you don't have to compete with intensity, because they naturally help each other look better and look brighter and more, they help each other rise to the occasion, as it were. So blues and greens the oranges are going to help the blues and greens look more blue and green and pop more, as opposed to necessarily competing for that attention. So that would be my thoughts, to kind of just take these guys to another level, give them some intensity, so their eyes moving around each of the models and not just zooming right in on that white middle spot. So there you go.
Yeah, right on. I got one more thing.
Do it.
The skulls themselves. If we're going for Ghost Rider, then I want to see them skulls get lit on fire. Ghost Rider's defining trait is a flaming skull.
Yeah.
Make them skulls burn, buddy.
I didn't notice that they were orc skulls. That's cool.
Which is great. Like, I love the skull change. I think it fits perfectly to me. Those look amazing. And you get a bunch of those in the skull pack. So great use of that. Skull pack is the gift that keeps on giving. I swear to you, I would buy like 50 of them if I could and just have them around for all these different skulls. But I say light them up. Like, when I was a kid, Ghost Rider and that flaming skull was pretty much the coolest thing ever. So I'd love to see you take it all the way. Okay. All right. So we got 2 things left. Let's just take a look together. So we've got Michael Borgens and Hooves with his first submission back in a while.
Oh, that guy.
Indeed.
I know him.
So Michael finished another bug for his Tyranids, and he says, besides generic feedback, he'd like some advice on the swords. Does the green fit the rest of the color scheme? Are the edge highlights too much? So on and so forth. All right. He also said he found scale 75 is much easier to blend than GW. Yeah, you ain't kidding on that.
Probably.
It certainly is. It is once you paint with scale 75, you're like, oh, right. Okay, now I get it. But hey, to each their own. All right, so let's look at this side shot because this will be the most sort of instructive. Here's my thought on the green swords. Are they too much? Yes, but they don't have to be. Because you did a nice job, like a really nice job of blending down this darker color into them. All I need is the green put in just a little bit more places. So like it could run here in the barrel of the gun. It could be his hooves. It could be a singular stripe up the back and center of his carapace. Like it could run, you could do a similar thing here. It could be a hashing down the bottom of each carapace. Like you could take the blue and you could run a green like pattern that then also gets dark black toward the bottom of the carapace. You could take his tail out to a green. You could make the lines inside him green. You pick all these things. It's all fine. Any of those are fine. I don't mind the little bits of orange. Again, you just need, like, it's your pop color, so that's cool. For my money, you just need to spread it around a little more. Let's see some glowing eyes, orange in the mouth. The inside here would be, again, if you don't do these little inner things in green, little poppy, these little inner tissue things in orange would be freaking fantastic. Like they're begging for that. But just little touches like that. Maybe his tongue's orange. I don't know. You know,
this might be counter to what you were saying, Kieran, with the metallic one. There are certainly some organic patterns on carapaces and stuff that do kind of have clear color separation. And so in this combination, you could certainly put some organic, like you said, markings or like blurbs on with that turquoise color or the seafoam color right on top of the blue, and then orange spots in the middle of that for very like kind of like the poison dart frog type of feel.
Oh yeah.
So I think you could, but you got to be really intentional about it, right? You got to be make and balance those out. When you start getting into spots and stuff, you got to find balance and weight around the model.
Yeah, I think to build on that, I would say that if you do that, and I like it, you got to be intentionally random. Is the words I want to use. So you can't do exactly the same balancing of pattern on the left side as the right side. I mean, there might be as much volume of it, but it's going to be in a mildly different shape. Does that make sense to you guys? I hope it makes sense to people listening.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Balanced, but not perfectly symmetrical.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
nature is random, right? Like it isn't a machine that has been planned and is naturally symmetrical. So you have to be random in that way, right? While still creating balance, but you can be imperfectly balanced, asymmetrical, like human faces. Human faces are not perfectly symmetrical, and when we see symmetrical faces, it's actually disturbing to us. But we don't think about that. Like when you're just sort of looking at another person, their face seems roughly symmetrical, but it's not. It's close, but not perfect.
Well, speak for yourself.
That's one of those human golf things, because computers, when they make human faces, tend to make them perfectly symmetrical. And you don't notice it, but your brain does. All right. So Mr. Hooves has some putrid blight kings for us. So first things first, Hooves, welcome back. Second thing second, can we underexpose this a little bit? Did you have all the light in the universe on top of these guys? Are you like literally creating a sun above them? Yeah. So maybe wheel that back a little bit. Now, that being said,
but welcome back for sure.
But welcome back. I'm gonna turn this over to somebody else to comment, because these guys are officially gross.
This is the part I don't like, the extruded bits.
Yeah, this is exactly. Yeah, here's where we're right into my nope. Just a whole bunch of nope.
Would you say it's a sore spot?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Okay, and we're done for the month.
All right. So thanks everybody.
Great.
No, I'm really liking. It looks like he's using some of the Shattered Dominion bases. Maybe not, but there's some really cool textures, very subtle ones that are going on, and I like that you're using kind of a toned down brown with the greens, and I feel like it creates a very cool kind of base for the more saturated colors of the skin and the armor. Yeah, I like that you've gone with a really dark green armor. There's just a lot of great ability to contrast with both the yellow brown of the horns and the pinky red flesh of the skin. I think you've separated all those different textures and kind of elements in their own spaces really well. Yeah, definitely. It's hard to see with the exposure, hard to see any subtleties in your skin texture primarily, and it probably accentuates some of the variation in your green armor. So likely, great job on the skin. Take the armor to some more highs and lows. Reverse engineering.
And what I want to see in here, Hooves, is verdigris on that copper. That copper's got to be dirty, messy, old, and stinky, just like the other parts. So mix up some of your own turquoise action on there if you need to. But it needs it, I think. That'd be my ad that I can see from these photos.
It's Kieran's verdigris episode.
That's right. Yeah. You took exactly that. I was going to say the same thing. It just feels strange, right? That copper is it's so clean on these guys. And that's a strange thing for us to see on Nurgle for sure. We want to see that heavily weathered gross copper. All right. Now, for those a little surprised, for those who have watched to the end, is what I'll say is Hooves painted this as part of his. I don't know if you've both seen what Mr. Hooves is up to.
I have.
He has a big table where he has sort of all the armies, and he was struggling because he was trying to do these big, huge projects, and he kept basically, talking himself out of doing them, right? Like he just found it too hard because he would get bored and then couldn't finish and stuff like that. So he started a new project called 1 week, 1 project, 1 army, right? So he rolls every week and he works on something different. So like last week he did some Empire Spearmen. This week he's doing some Blight Kings. Next week he's doing something, Grey Knights, and then he's going to do some Talaran Raiders or whatever. Cool. Dig it. So that I love as an idea, and that is going to be something we steal for our next hobby challenge. We're going to all participate. We're going to all jump on the Hooves train, and we're going to do a 1 week, 1 project, challenge for a month or two. And everybody has to do something completely different. They have to make their own table, their own random thing, and pick a different thing every week.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm. Won't that be a fun challenge?
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I love this idea because it's just like it's such a great chance to bounce projects, to work on things that you've always wanted to paint one thing from this army, or you've got 5 figures from a kill team or whatever. Right? This will be an awesome chance to do that. But at any rate, we're not there yet. We're talking about this. So, gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the month, and that leads to my next question. What was your favorite for the month? Look, and let's all just say Andrew Wade's thing was amazing. Okay. Yeah. None of us are picking that because we would all it's incredible. It is art. It is gorgeous, Andrew. You are I don't know how. Obviously, we would all pick that. I mean, I don't want to say speak put words in anybody's mouth. I just mean like that would be a worthy pick from anyone, but it's too on the nose, right? So, Andrew, you get the honorable like lifetime achievement award. That thing is incredible. But there we go. All right. So, other than Andrew, what's our pick?
I want to choose the glorious King of the Desert, flying chariot, zombie monster. And who was that done by? I got to scan back here.
Tristan
Gray.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the vision and creativity and boldness to put all those things together certainly deserves more than just a good nod of "Hey, good job." Like that's it's great. It's great vision, first of all, to encapsulate that and pull it together. So that's my pick.
Nice. Eric, what about yourself, sir?
I was going to go there, but since you picked that one, yep. I'm going to go with Dylan Cartier.
Yeah. Is this the theme here? Is we're all going to steal the next person's choice? You're going to choose his archangel, right?
Yeah, that the big hordes or war machine thing.
Knowing that there was a strong chance you might have stolen that from me, I have a backup, so it's okay.
Well, that's good. That's the responsible thing to do, is to have a backup. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed the tones in there, the warms, the colds, and the how it moves around the model. Just a really great job there. Yeah,
I agree. My pick is going to be the OSL Mordheim Warband from Sumer. I love it. It's painting bravely. It's a bold experimentation in color, in light. It's everything I love to see in the PMP. It's somebody pushing themselves and trying something and achieving new, wonderful things. And it's not perfect, but who cares? There is no such thing as a perfect miniature. That doesn't exist. What it is awesome. So I love it. I would love to see. I hope he keeps experimenting with stuff like that, with extreme lighting. Since he's doing more warbands, I hope he plays. Sumer, if you watch this, here's my shout out, brother. I want to see you take the old Skaven warband and do a mono environmental ambient lighting in green, right? With like warpstone coming up from below, right? And from like their blades and stuff like that. I think that would be there's another interesting challenge for you, how that color would play. So
I'd like to see Vince do that.
I think that would be pretty sweet. I perhaps sometime. I got a long list of projects, buddy.
For sure.
But maybe for that hobby challenge you just mentioned.
Absolutely. Perhaps that'll be a thing.
1 week project.
There you go. We'll see what we can do. But for everybody who submitted this month, thank you. As always, at the end of this, I say these things, but I really mean it. We love doing this. It's a lot of fun every month, but we are not we're not the heroes. Everybody who is answering every question asked, who's commenting on the posts, who's giving people feedback and critiques and helping people take their next step every time, you are the people who are the glue that brings this community together. And I am so proud of this community and all the feedback I see on every post. It's wonderful. So I want to thank everybody who contributes and say to those who are not, if you're in, jump in. If you see a post come in and you like it, pop that open and say, this is awesome. I love it. Just a little thing like that. Or if you see somebody ask a question that you know the answer to, pop it open, give them a quick answer, right? Help somebody take that next step, show somebody appreciation. We'll all get there together. But as always, I was very happy to see all these submissions this month. So thank you to all the people who submitted. Kieran, any final thoughts from you this month?
Yeah, I think what I want to make a plug for is the next time that you see us will be the end of October, and that'll also be the time that our current PMP challenge is wrapping up. So that is the Get It Done challenge, which Vince had advertised a while ago. If you haven't seen it yet, it is pinned to the top of the page on the main page, and even at this point, it's not too late. That if you want to get to work on something and you can get it done in the month of October, then please get it done. Throw it in the mix.
Yeah, exactly. Realistically, it's a minimum of 9 models. So you can do it even with only a month left. Now you can do a lot more than that, right?
Yeah.
But there you go. So so don't, now's the time. Pull that stuff off the shelf. Get it done. But Eric, any final thoughts from you, sir?
No, as usual, it's just great to see these different different models that I usually see, and different approaches and schemes, and people trying to improve. So keep it up, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to take a look at what you've been working on, what you've poured your passions into.
Absolutely. Completely agreed. So with that, I will say thank you very much to everybody. We appreciate you watching. And as always, we'll see you next time.